happening, everybody? Welcome to the Paranormies presents the Ahnenerbe Hour. I am Johnny Monoxide, and tonight I'm joined by Mr. Scott Taylor, Mr. Bradshaw Wilson, and one Mr. Paddy Tarleton. What's happening, fellas?
Hey, how you doing?
Doing all right.
Doing all right. Thanks for coming on, Paddy. We played one of your songs last week.
Thanks for having me on. Appreciate it.
Yeah, no worries, dude. Yeah, we played your Sweet London song last week, and it was, that's a great song. I love your music, dude. The banjo was cool.
I appreciate it.
Yeah, I like the banjo a lot.
Yeah, there's more of that coming in the new one that I'm working on right now. It's going to be out on Mice Trap Records, so I've been incorporating that a little more into the music. So yeah. Cool.
And what's happening, Scott? You got cut off there for a second.
Not much, just the usual.
Right on. And Mr. Bradshaw, you back?
I actually just took a trip recently.
Did you?
Nice little trip. Yeah, I went to the Cryptozoology Museum in Portland, Maine.
Ooh, tell us a little bit about that.
So the Cryptozoology...
Hold on, hang on a second, Brad. Let's get all the business stuff out the way before we do the actual thing there. We got let's knock out donations real fast, and we got a couple emails, but we'll save those. We'll save the emails. Let me just do the donations real fast, and we'll get that out of the way because we got a few this week. We appreciate it, guys. I know we said last week we didn't get any donations, and we had spent all our donations on new mics for everybody, and everybody sounds great now, so it's wonderful. Again, thank you, Goyam, for that. But this week we got 10 from Tom Schnaldenbach, who says, regardless of whatever the name might be on the account, say this name. Okay, Tom Schnaldenbach. I said it twice. We got 15 from Juan. It's not Juan like he has to go back over the wall, but it's spelled differently. Says he loved the H.P. Lovecraft episode. Keep up the good work, boys. Thanks, Juan. We got 1488 from Ian, and he says, hi, Paranormies, been listening since episode 1, but hadn't gotten in touch anyway before. Love the show, very entertaining, and I've learned a lot. As another donor mentioned, your best episode so far has been the Missing 411. I also think it's probably fairies. Thanks for all your work, and hail victory from Ireland. Well, hail victory, Ian. Thank you, sir. And from Heathcliff, we received 8814. Thank you, sir. And then just a few minutes ago, we received $20 from Charles. So, right on. Thanks a lot, Goyam. We appreciate the donations. We put them to good use. We've, like I said, we use it to keep the show going. So, thank you guys. And we'll skip ahead we'll do the emails later. But, anyways, you can get a hold of us at paranormiespresent@gmail.com. That is both our Gmail and our donations for PayPal. And we are on Twitter at The Paranormies. And we are on Facebook at Paranormies Present The Ahnenerbe Hour. So that's all of our social media and shilling for today. All right, cool. So, Brad, you said you went to the Cryptozoology Museum in Portland, Maine. How did you manage to get to go there, by the way?
Oh, you want me to tell? You want me to say how?
No, I don't, because it's rather embarrassing. But yeah, I lost.
Oh no, it's thanks to all the fans. Your donations paid for my ticket. Yeah.
That's right. It is from the fans. The donations paid for the ticket. Yeah, it was great.
Yeah, I was kind of surprised. I heard actually I met up with a buddy of mine in Maine, and he told me the place used to be right on the main drag in downtown. But they sold the building, tore it down, and they had to move into a smaller location. So apparently a lot of things are missing that used to be there. It was cool. I mean, it was only $10 each, so it wasn't like crazy expensive. But they had some cryptids there that I actually didn't know about, like the kappa from Japanese folklore, which are like these little amphibious turtle guys who try to lure children into the water to kill them. Sometimes they'll rip a fictional organ, I don't remember the name, out of a Japanese man through their anus.
Ouch.
Like they'll just reach into the anus and pull an organ out.
So they're Japanese turtles that do it. So they're like evil ninja turtles.
They're like small, short, little. Yeah, no, they are actually the inspiration for the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles.
Oh, I knew it. Nice.
So the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles are in fact evil, and you shouldn't let your children watch them. That and their niggers down. No, they're niggers now too. So that
they rip the
pizzas are that fictional organ.
Yeah.
Hold on, one at a time. Go ahead. What'd you say, Scott?
Oh, I was just asking if that's where they get the pizza from, is they rip it out of some Japanese man's anus. You never know. That's all I'm saying.
Ouch.
You never know.
Right. So what other kind of cryptids do they have there, Brad?
They had a lot of different displays. One thing that they were really big on in that place was Champy, or Champ, from he's pretty much the Loch Ness Monster of Lake Champlain, which is between New York and Vermont. It's like one of the bigger New England cryptids, and Coleman, the owner, Lauren Coleman, being a New Englander, he likes that, and he came up with the term Dover Demon, which is another cryptid. I believe I've talked about him on a previous episode. He has the really bright eyes. He's like about the size of a Doberman. There was a really cool, like, I don't want to call it like a taxidermy of it, but it was like a statue of the Dover Demon. They had a few different taxiderm things, like a jackalope, a thunderbird, like small micro size, but they had a scale head of a Gigantopithecus. Is that how you pronounce it? The giant ape?
Yeah, that's how you pronounce it.
That thing was massive. It was just the head, but it was massive. I can only imagine how big that thing would have been.
A Gigantopithecus? Is that what it's called? Gigantopithecus?
Well, there's some theories that that's what Bigfoot is, but I mean, seeing that head, like, and then seeing, like, footage of Bigfoot, or even like a foot cast of Bigfoot, like, this thing was way bigger than a Bigfoot would be. Wow.
And this thing supposedly lives in New England, or it did live in New England?
No, it's like an ancient sort of ape.
Okay. Interesting.
Yeah, it no longer exists.
Okay. And did they have a Bigfoot display? And yeah,
they had a Bigfoot that when you enter the museum, there's like a TV playing with Mr. Coleman on it, and he's like telling you to take selfies with the Bigfoot statue. So I don't want to call it a statue. It was like a taxiderm Bigfoot, pretty much.
That's cool. So did you learn anything while you were there, or was it just like mostly like statues?
No, I did. Like I said, I learned about the Kappa. They actually he tries to connect like all these mythical crazy creatures with reality, because by the first display he has, which are creatures that were originally cryptozoological, and then they became discovered regular old animals, like the Kopi, the tapir, the Komodo dragon, stuff like that. So he doesn't try and get, like, it's not like a far-fetched place. Like, he's not trying to say, like, Bigfoot's real and he sucked my dick or anything like that.
Whoa.
He comes at it from a scientific approach.
Interesting.
So there are animals that used to be cryptids and now they're no longer cryptids because they're real animals?
Yeah, like the Komodo dragon is the one that I knew. It was originally just like a mythical thing, like, oh, I saw these giant lizards or whatever. And then scientists eventually found it, and they said, well, this is a real animal now.
Huh. Okay. Do you think that's ever going to happen with Bigfoot?
I'm not sure. Honestly, I'm not even sure if Bigfoot's real. I want to believe, but I'm not completely convinced, even after my trip to the museum.
Right. Wow, that's pretty interesting either way. I mean, the Gigantopithecus especially, like, I don't know when that was around. Was that around when, like, anatomically modern humans were around, or was that from way before?
It's the I honestly can't pronounce any of the words. Neogene era?
Yes.
Oh, good Lord.
I have no idea what that is.
Yeah.
No, I just think it'd be interesting if it was actually around when people were around.
I don't believe it was. Because if it was still around, it would be the one, controlling the world, not us.
Well, I mean, Neanderthals were around when humans were around, and they don't control shit. They're dead.
Yeah.
Right.
Well, these guys were, like 3 meters tall.
Huh. That's pretty cool. So is there anything else there, or was it kind of a small exhibit?
Extremely small. My favorite thing I saw was he had a little display of craft beers that are named after cryptids. And yeah, alcoholic jokes. But no, a lot of them are local breweries from New England. And I've actually, I mentioned, was it Down the Road Brewery has a Pukwudgie Ale, and that wasn't the case. Yeah. A lot of their beers are in there because they have a lot of cryptids in the front, like giants and fairies and all that kind of stuff.
Huh, that's cool. So, would you recommend this place to someone then?
I wouldn't recommend taking a trip like I did, but if you're in the area and you don't mind spending $10, it's a cool little hole in the wall, I guess. My girlfriend actually went to the gift shop and she got a miniature jackalope, like little. I don't know. It's like a taxidermed jackalope. It's not real.
You want to explain what a jackalope is for people who don't know? Oh,
a jackalope is it's a rabbit with deer antlers.
It's 100% real too.
Yeah, it's also my girlfriend's favorite cryptid, so she had to buy it.
It's one of those animals that they thought was fake, and then they found out it was real, because where else would all these gift shops be getting jackalopes from?
Yeah,
exactly.
No,
like they don't just those things. They don't just show up for no reason. Yeah,
right.
This totally wasn't made in China.
It was? No, there's no way.
No, it wasn't. No way.
Right.
It's real. It's in a gift shop.
Well, that's cool, Brad.
That's pretty cool. Yeah.
I'm glad you guys had a good time. You checked it out. I've seen a couple of the pictures so far. Maybe if I can get a couple pictures from you this evening, I can have Adam render some of them into the video on the YouTube.
I'll see what I got on my phone, but we took my girlfriend's camera with me, and that's where
her
most
camera
of the pictures are.
Is it a digital camera or actual film camera?
It's one of the. It's like it's not it's a professional level camera, but it is digital, and the problem is the pictures are massive because of all the megapixels. Siri, what's a megapixel?
Right. No, we're not.
So they're going to take some time, and I'm going camping tomorrow, so I won't be able to get them out there.
Okay. Well, maybe we'll postpone the YouTube release for a day or two until you get back or whatever. I don't know.
Yeah.
Right on.
Yeah.
It sounds like you had a good time.
Going out into the woods.
Yeah,
so
you went out into the woods.
Don't get. I'm going out into the woods. Hopefully, I don't get. Yeah, that's what I'm going to say. Apparently ticks are a problem right now. My roommate was telling me, wear some bright clothing so we can see ticks on each other, and be like, nah, you can wear bright clothing. Enjoy your time with the fucking fairies, dude.
Is your girlfriend going with you, or is it just going to be you and the roommate?
Yeah, everyone's going. Me and the roommates are all going up. We're going to spend a night up on a mountain.
Nice. Sounds like a lot of fun. Yeah, don't get got by fairies. So that's all I got to say.
I'm way more scared of fairies than I am of Lyme disease.
Right?
Yeah.
It's totally true. All right. So that was fun. So now the real reason we're here tonight, Mr. Paddy Tarleton, what's happening, buddy? Uh-oh. Did we lose Paddy?
Hey, sorry. No. I'm here. I apologize for that.
Oh, it's okay. It's okay.
I think my mouse was messing up on my microphone. Sorry.
Oh, no worries.
Yeah.
No worries.
Hey, what's going on?
Oh, not much. We hear that you are a bit of an expert on the topic that we're going to be talking about tonight, which is Salem and these Salem Witch Trials.
Oh yeah. I mean, New England history in general. I've always been kind of a spurg for I'm not originally from here. I'm from the northern Delaware, Philadelphia area, that general region. And, I had only moved up here recently. It was, my first time coming here was in 2013 on a camping trip, and it was for, seeing the historic sites. I went to Salem, and we went to Plymouth and several other areas. And the interesting thing about Salem is that it is directly linked and tied to the Indian wars that happened here, specifically King Philip's War. Bradshaw and I had a little short-lived podcast some months back, had a couple episodes, and we talked about the Indian wars a lot in this area. And the war affected so much in the region that, the reason why those events happened in Salem were a direct result of that. But if, I don't know where you want me to begin. I mean, I could go on all night talking about this, so I don't want to get too off topic, but let's do
witches and witchcraft and the Salem Witch Trials tonight. How about that? We can do that. Right?
Sure. Absolutely. Yeah.
So Salem, let real quick. That was basically, when was Salem founded? I know it's one of the older colonies.
It was one of the early ones. It was founded around, I think it was sometime around the 1630s during the Pequot War, if I'm not mistaken. I don't remember the exact date of when it was founded, but it was really just like any other, North Shore town at that time. Ipswich and several other towns that were in the area. Andover was another one. It is important to know though that the events in Salem, there were two. They were kind of split. There was Salem Town, and then there was Salem Village, which today is Danvers. At that time, it wasn't called Danvers. That was just the site of the small village, and it looked like any other village. I mean, if you've ever been to Plymouth Plantation, it looked exactly like that. It just would have looked like a standard 17th century English village, which they didn't really look that much different than Elizabethan era English villages. Gotcha. So really simple thatched roof houses, very simple. Go ahead. You had a question.
Yeah, no, I was going to say, which is funny enough, because one of the most haunted places in Massachusetts was the Danvers Mental Institution, or Danvers Hospital, which is,
where is that?
It was long closed. It closed back in like the 80s for good, but it ran during, like the late 1800s until the 1980s.
Interesting.
And it was, it's known for being one of the few mental institutes that paranormal investigators could not get into because it had such tight security, and there was only one group that ever got in there at night, and they refused to tell anyone what they saw there.
Really? Huh. So, it's not still around then?
They took down the main building. I think all that's left is the clock tower, and they're going to build condos there.
We should try to get the people who went in there on the show, finally break the silence, see what they
probably don't want to for legal reasons, because they were, trespassing.
Well, it's not like any of us use pseudonyms or anything.
Right.
So, that'd be fun to do, though. Not get scared by ghosts, but learn what happened. An
interesting thing about Salem is that a lot of, and I didn't mean to talk over anyone, I apologize. I don't know if you were done covering.
No, you're fine.
Institution. Well, one of the things about Salem is that, like I said, it is where modern day Danvers is today, but it also included parts of Beverly, and I think Marblehead also was part of Salem at that time too. It was a very, very large village. It was one of the largest villages in the area, because a lot of the villages in the South Shore were kind of tiny. Plymouth, and which originally was called Wessagusset, which was an Indian word. It was pronounced Wassagawek, but the town of Salem, grew really rapidly, and it was a really big town. And the Puritans, by that point, you're talking about, I mean, first of all, the trials happened in the 1690s, which, getting near to like the end of the 17th century. And at that time, the population in Massachusetts, in the Bay Colony, was just what we would call today PTSD, very much like people during the Balkans War, the way they were sort of, socially kind of fucked up because of all the, the constant fighting, or maybe somebody who lived during the Troubles in Northern Ireland would have felt like. I think I read once during the Iraq invasion, they were actually giving Valium and Xanax out to the local population just to get them through, because people were just so anxiety ridden. They were just life was just so difficult.
King Philip's.
Oh.
Yeah, we're here. Sorry.
Sorry.
King Philip's War you mentioned earlier. King Philip was an Indian, correct?
He was. His name was Mate Colmet, but the English, of course, didn't know how to pronounce his name very well. Just didn't feel like pronouncing very well. Who the hell wants to say that? It
Right,
sounds a little
so it's
goofy.
just
So
Well, no, we have
it's just easier to say, and they did that.
So
Yeah.
we have a tendency to do that anyway. So what's the name of your country? España. Nah, it's Spain. Yeah. Deutschland.
The
That's
only
way
reason
too
I
hard.
was
It's
saying,
Germany.
yeah, I apologize. The only reason I said hello earlier was because I was getting these clicks in my headphones. It's a message popped up. Somebody's mic was muted or whatever. So I was just making sure everything was working correctly.
Oh no, we're
Oh no, we're good. We're good. Yeah.
Yeah,
I was having
so-
a little bit of I accidentally inhaled some beer down the wrong pipe, and I didn't want to cough all over the podcast, so I muted for a second. So yeah.
So basically, the reason why the Indian Wars were such and you can't really talk about why Salem happened without talking about the wars, and I won't go too into it, but I will say that there were 3 major Indian Wars that had happened in the region that affected everyone, and one that was ongoing at the time Salem happened. So that was the Pequot War, which happened in the 1630s, and then you had King Philip's War, which was the big one that was in the 1670s. Now, when that war happened, there were 2 theaters. There was the Southern Theater and the Northern Theater. And the Northern Theater lasted well into about 1678. And a lot of the girls who were the accused and the accusers, so both of them, because you had girls sort of pointing each other out, and then they were also pointing other adults out. And not just women, even men. There was a Reverend George Burroughs that was, he was accused of being a warlock, and he was executed. So the feminists sort of like to take the Salem thing, and they like to, even if you go to that stupid museum in Salem town, which I strongly advise anyone who's listening who's never been to, who wants to go to Salem, stay the fuck away from museums because they're full of shit. There's nothing there. It's like literally like a Wiccan liberals leftist sort of commie like nightmare. It's just awful. We went there shits and giggles, me and a couple TRS guys, just to kind of have a laugh, you know what I mean? And it was, but we regretted it because it's like $12 to get in, and it's a really bad museum. I mean, it's really bad. But anyway, so
Is that the one with the animatronics?
yeah, it's pretty bad, man.
It's so hokey looking.
Yeah, it's pretty bad. So basically, you shoot to 1692. So you've had a major Indian War, right? Now, what happened was most of the girls, not all of them, but most of them that were living in Salem at that time were not from the area. They weren't from Massachusetts. They were from Maine and from the frontier and parts of what was kind of Massachusetts then, because Massachusetts was really big. You had several colonies in the region. New Hampshire really wasn't around, so it was kind of incorporated with that. But you had what they called frontier girls, because they were kind of like rednecks. Like, they had funny accents. Their accents sounded very much like East Anglian accents from England at the time, which is where the main accent comes from today. And so these girls were like basically misfits, and they were screwed up in the head because they'd literally watched Indians from several tribes in the region that were Algonquin Indians. Basically, like Mercy Lewis was one of the girls in the Salem Witch Trials. She was friends with Abigail Williams, who most of us know from the Crucible. Mm-hmm. And Mercy Lewis describes in eyewitness accounts as watching her, several of her relatives, being raped and slaughtered, and then the bodies dragged into the woods like deer carcass. And she watched this all happen when she was a little girl. I mean, she didn't even reach puberty yet when she watched this. So basically, you get these fucked up in the head girls that are basically living in a war zone because, the Indian raids, there was no Great Britain yet. We only were, a crown colony to England, and that was it. There was no Scotland. There wasn't a very, England wasn't that powerful like they were later on. And so the English could not afford to send troops over to help anyone because they were already entangled in the Dutch wars. So, and they had all kinds of scandals and affairs going on. They had dealt with their king being killed in the 1640s. Charles I was executed by the proto-communist Puritans. And of course, the Puritans took over a huge influence all over New England, especially in the South and North Shore area outside of Boston. So they basically just slowly, little by little, booted out the Anglicans and anyone else who got in their way. And they had this religious sort of, like, it was kind of like a proto-commie kind of, egalitarian nightmare. They were anti-royalists, so nobody wanted to help them anyway. So
were the Puritans related to the levelers, or am I thinking of a
the
different
levelers. Yeah, there were the levelers, and then there were the diggers, and they were even more radical than the Puritans were. Puritan was actually not a word they used among themselves. It was kind of seen as a slur, kind of like how Nazi wasn't really used by National Socialists. It was just sort of like a slur.
Right.
They just saw themselves as dissenters, they called them, or separatists, or they saw themselves as being in the right, and everybody else was wrong. So you shoot to 1692, around the time the accusations started coming out, and you have all these refugees from Maine, and no one knows what to do with them. So they said, well, these girls, will employ them, in people's houses. You can be a servant. You can live with, and girls like Abigail Williams, for example, she stayed with Reverend Samuel Parris, whose foundation, his home, is still there in Danvers. If you ever get a chance, you can actually find it. If anybody's interested, I can let you know where it is after the show. But it's pretty easy to find. It's actually behind somebody's house, but they don't give a shit if you go look at it. Like, no one cares. But it's cool because it's like off the beaten path, and no one ever goes to it. You get these people that come from all over the world because they want to see Salem, and they get stuck in the tourist trap in Salem town, and they don't even know that the real events happened in Danvers. But so anyway, so. By 1692, another Indian war was already happening. This is now the third major one, which we now call.
Hold on, when you say Indian wars, you mean wars between the colonists and the Indians, or wars between Indians and Indians?
Both. Basically, like, the Indians were in a proxy war. There were the anti-English Indians and then the pro-English Indians. So you had, and they all switched sides during different periods. Like when the English came under, on the Mayflower with guys like Miles Standish and John Alden, those guys are buried over in Duxbury. Well, when they came over, they first got into it with the Pequot, and they kicked the shit out of them. And that war didn't last that long. So the Pequot suddenly became the English allies, and they loved the English, and many of them even converted. And what had happened was a lot of these they were under the Wampanoag was the big tribe, the big powerful tribe in the area. And the English loved the chief Massasoit, which is where Massasoit College is named after. They loved him because this guy basically hooked the English up with a lot of stuff, land, everything. He was like, hey, I don't have a problem with you guys. But there were little squabbles here and there, but it wasn't anything major. And they hated the Pequot. So they were like, well, help us kick the shit out of the Pequot. We'll give you anything you want. Long story short. So you get to the 1670s, Massasoit's dead, and he has his son made to Calmette, King Philip. And this guy was like a radical. I mean, he just loved war. He was a warlike guy. He was always looking for an excuse to get into shit. I mean, liberal historians today will tell you that the English were taking their land, but really what it was that the Indians were very bad and tricky kind of business people. They just didn't understand European business practices. And, at the time the Puritans kind of like, they weren't really the best people, but they weren't really dishonorable in the sense of like, doing business transactions. The French were much worse. And the French sort of used a lot of our enemy tribes against us. So they would hire them to conduct raids, and just, you'd have like maybe 200, Podunk was one of the tribes that did a lot of raids against the English. And these guys would descend on a town like Deerfield out in western Massachusetts and just like rape everybody. And
yeah, they basically raze it to the ground. Yeah.
Oh, it was terrible. I mean, and they practiced slavery. So one of their favorite things to do is they would take women to either rape or make brides.
That it wasn't white people doing the slavery; it was Indians. That's not what my history book told me.
Yeah. It's funny. The English at the time really didn't have slaves. They had indentured servants that were usually other white people, but they didn't really have Indian slaves. A lot of what they did was they sought to kind of convert them to Christianity, and you had this whole sect of Indians that called themselves praying Indians, and they would set up their own villages, and they found Christianity to be very favorable. They got a lot of benefits for their, and plus, they saw it as sort of a way of a lot of it had to do with business. The fur trade was really big in the region. That was like there was shipping and lumber, and then there was fur, and the Indians sort of, they weren't really good at business. They just weren't good at European business practices. There was a lot of cheating. There was a lot of accusing other people of cheating. And these wars just kept breaking out. And the French, who wanted control of the continent, especially New France and, Acadia and that region, which was very close to New England, they use that, to their advantage. So they sort of, oh, well, these English guys just want to ruin you. We'll help you with whatever you want. We'll get your land back. And so the Indians were sort of caught in this fucking, proxy war. So with Salem, this is all people know. White people that live in New England, that's all they know is just this war. I mean, war is happening everywhere. It's happening anywhere around them. You could go out at 6 a.m. and to milk your cow or tend your field, and all of a sudden you hear howls coming from the woods, and before you know it, your village is on fire, your wife is dead, and your children have been taken into slavery, and you're
right.
missing
The
a limb.
Podunks have come through and taken everybody in your town. Yeah.
Well, the Podunks, the Narragansetts, the Nashaways, the Wampanoag. Later on,
how do the
during
Pequots end up with so many casinos? Now, that's what I want to know.
What's that?
I said, how do the Pequots end up with so many casinos? They seem to be the big winners in the whole situation overall. What with Foxwoods and Mohegan Sun and all that, like those are the Mashantucket
Mohegan
Pequots.
Sun.
Yeah.
I want to know why we naming so much shit after these people who tried to kill us, like Narragansett, like the fucking Ferrari.
Hey, we put smallpox blankets in their care packages, okay? Okay.
To be
actually
honest, anyone
funny.
who's familiar with the Indians and how they conducted their warfare, is probably okay with the smallpox. I don't care that much.
There were some
Well, I
very
always say to
evil
people-
human beings, and to use the term human being, I use that loosely. They were some of the most vicious things on the planet. These natives.
Well, yeah, they were, but that's the thing where the Puritans and the trials come in, is because in earlier times there were other witch accusations happening before that. By the way, everybody thinks
There was one in
Salem was like this-
1647 in Connecticut, I believe. Was like the very first
and
recording of one.
Even before that one, the crime itself wasn't really that big of a deal. Usually what would happen is you would get arrested, you would pay a fine. The only downside to it was that you would it was basically on your record forever. So, and you were branded. It was kind of like today being branded a pedophile. It's something you didn't want. And that sounds kind of a extreme comparison, but to the religious, Puritan Protestant mind at the time period, that was the kiss of death. You didn't want that. You didn't want to be known as having been a former witch.
Or being branded a racist.
Or being branded a racist, exactly.
Oh,
yeah, it's very similar.
that's such a horrible thing.
So what, and that again, that sounds silly, but you have to look at it in the context of how these people viewed the world. These people were coming out of a post-Elizabethan English sort of mindset where the wilderness itself was viewed as evil. It was viewed as, dark. Anything that was in it was no good. The English people were so used to not living in very deep, thick wilderness, even back then, 300 years ago. The forests of England were not as thick as, as you might think. But you look at New England, there's so much wilderness here even now, but think about how it was in the 17th century. It was just, that's all there was. It was just endless miles of infinity of just woods, and that was it. And wildlife that they weren't even that familiar with yet. And if you've ever seen the Eastern Woodland Indians, accurate depictions of them, because there's historians that, we've seen the 1950s versions of Indians, which are kind of corny looking, but if you actually look at guys like, what's his name? Don Troiani and several other historians that paint, and they do accurate portrayals of what these people, the Eastern Woodland Indians in New England were fucking frightening looking, ghastly looking. The war look when you would go out to do a raid was you would paint your entire body either black and red or just all black or all red. And usually black was favored because it was just intimidating. They literally looked satanic. I mean, they looked, and this is to the 17th century mind that has never seen anything outside of, stockings and buckled shoes and, frock coats. And,
your
you've just never seen anything like that. Well, yeah, but we never really saw, there was nothing shocking visually in the world other than maybe, a musket wound or something. We're so desensitized in today's world with punk rock and with wild looking things, visually, but they didn't have any of this visual stimulation. So, maybe biblical paintings, but the Puritans wouldn't have looked at very many of them because that was against their religion. So, if you consider these Eastern Woodland Indians, I mean, just Google images of Abenaki warriors. they were scary looking, very scary. And, they associated the Indians with having been God's punishment because they weren't doing, I guess they weren't maintaining, it was for a variety of reasons. It depended upon what village you lived in. But, they were trying to make sense of why we're losing this war. Our home country won't help us. And we're basically helpless against these people who day after day, week after week are just hitting us in these vicious raids. There's no honor in the way they fight. The only way they could describe it was satanic. That's the only way they could describe it. That made sense.
I just looked up that Don Troiani guy.
Yeah,
and I
really
good. The paintings of it's great, but I looked up the paintings of these Indians, and it almost reminds me of like orcs from like Lord of the Rings. It's just savage is such an accurate description. Yeah, definitely get one Google Images. Go look it up. And
spell his last name.
That's going to be the word.
People.
Hold on. It's Don Toriani. And I just looked up Don Troiani Indian, and like the first and second results, it just looks like orcs, like just subhuman. I don't even know what you would call them. It's definitely frightening. Like if this came out of the woods chasing me, I'd shit my pants.
Oh yeah, and I've always said if you want to know what Indian warfare, the way they fought was like, look at MS-13 today. It's the same race, basically. I mean, you're looking at Amerindian descended people primarily, and you look at the way that they conduct their, the way their killings and such. It's like machetes and, slitting the throat and then pulling the tongue through. I mean, there are all kinds of crazy things they did. They would cut, during King Philip's War, there were reports and diaries of where it sort of sounds like what they did in the Viet Cong in Vietnam. They would cut the genitals off of the males and shove them in their throats, and then they would hang them from a tree upside down. And that was like, they would put it along trails to sort of like frighten people, don't enter this part of the woods. This is what's going to happen to you. And it happened to children too. And these were not exaggerated reports.
Discriminate.
These
they
are
didn't
straight
discriminate at all.
No, no. And it wasn't because the other thing is, the oversimplified leftist argument is, well, they did this because the whites were taking their land. Actually, that's not true. The Indians were doing that to each other all the time. I mean, if you look out west, Nez Perce terrorized the Shoshone. The Sioux were horrific to the Pawnee. Contrary to Dances with Wolves, where it's the other way around. It's the Pawnee picking on the Sioux. In real life, it was the other way around. The Sioux were fucking brutal.
Don't forget the Comanches. Guys like the Comanches were brutal to everybody.
Oh, yeah. Very brutal, absolutely. I actually see that painting you just put up. That's from the French and Indian War. Those are Scottish Highlanders during the 1750s fighting in Pennsylvania. It's Eastern Woodland, classic Algonquin Eastern Woodland Indians, black and red, head shaved. They look demonic. They looked like demons, and they sounded like them.
Yeah, definitely. No, what you said about the MS-13 thing, that's what I was thinking as well. When people are always talking about like Aztecs or whatever, and it's like, oh, I can't imagine that they actually cut people's hearts out and this and that. Like, it's not that hard to imagine.
No, not at all.
Just go on to like Liveleak or whatever, and you can watch Mexicans today like cut someone's face off while they're alive. Like it's it's insane the level of violence. The
level of violence that the Latinos have is animalistic at like best. You know what I mean? To say it's animals don't do that.
Right. And I mean, basically, I could be wrong, but I'm pretty sure that the American Indians and Mexicans are the same genetic stock.
Basically, American Indians, it's.
I mean, I'm sure they're different in the same way someone from Portugal and someone from Norway is different, but like it's the same basic.
Precisely.
Right.
So basically, and that's why I kind of went on a tangent about the Indian Wars to get you into the mindset of what these people were thinking and why. It really disgusts me when I go to these museums and places. You see how much leftism has and the Jewish agenda has sort of affected history so much, is that they just perverted everything to be, oversimplified as if, the English at the time were these monsters that just came through and wanted to expand everything, and nothing could have been further from the truth. Actually, it was the Indians themselves that were expanding the fur trade because they couldn't get enough of it. They were making a killing off of it, and they were greedy. And you know, it just blows my mind how people, you got these like 25-year-old straight out of college, like, you know, nitwits that, and they're telling people this who don't know, you know, who are genuinely interested, genuinely. Oh, why did these things happen? Oh, well, you know, these people were just crazy Christians and they wanted to oppress people. And it's like, no. I mean, if you've ever looked at, you know, New England countryside at night and you stared out into the woods, you can imagine, you know, living in a town in like 1688 during King William's War, which that was the war that was happening at the time the Salem Witch Trials happened. So you figure, like, you know, you're living in a small village, or, you know, a sizable village like Salem in that case, or you could be living in a smaller village like Ipswich at the time, and you know, you just hear that like not even 10 miles away, the whole village has just been burned down and wiped out, and they're on their way. What are you going to do? Well, you don't have a standing army protecting you. You have your local militia who have no experience and they're scared shitless. I mean, that's the world you were living in, and there's nothing to the west. So, right. But wilderness and more
wilderness. Yeah. I mean,
so
I used to live in Maine.
Yeah.
I used to live in Maine, and we had wilderness, you know, I mean, still, you know, modern day wilderness. It was still woods and stuff. And the woods, coming from somebody who's from New York and Connecticut to go live out in the middle of nowhere in Caribou, Maine, it's scary. Like, the woods are scary, you know, they're really, really scary for somebody who's never been there. All the birch tree, like at night,
that's
with the full moon and the
Indians.
Yeah, exactly. Like the white birch trees are spooky enough by themselves, you know, and I can imagine an army of black and red, you know, shaved heads, screaming lunatic, you know, hatchet and axe, you know, bow carrying Indians coming at you. That would put some fear into anybody, you know?
Oh, and they had guns at that point. I mean, that's the other Hollywood myth, is that actually one of a pretty accurate portrayal of Eastern Woodland Indians would have been the retreat from Fort William Henry, which happened during the French and Indian War of the 1750s, in Last of the Mohicans. If you've seen that scene where they get ambushed and they're walking, and they've got women and children with them and civilians, and you hear the scream coming from the woods all in unison, just hundreds of them, just with that howl, that very demonic sort of, you know, call that they're like, it sounds like a wolf, you know, and or like an evil bird or something. I don't know what to like.
Yeah, it's scary. It's scary no matter what it is. Yeah. Yeah.
And you know, they had all kinds of weapons, but they did have muskets even then at that period. Now, actually, if you talk to Wampanoag descendants today, they will tell you this. They'll say, well, you know, the English barred us from using our muskets and we couldn't hunt. So that's why King Philip's War happened. Well, the only problem is that only happened after a significant event happened, which is tied to Salem. It's sort of, you had this guy, John Sassamon. I just visited the site today for the first time. It's beautiful. It's out in Lakeville. For anybody that's been there, it's gorgeous out there. It's Assawamsett Pond, and it's a very large pond, and it's right across from Long Pond, which is a smaller area. A lot of beach homes are there, like beach style, like trailer type houses, very quaint. And what happened was, this guy was kind of like a Talleyrand. What Talleyrand was to Napoleon, John Sassamon was to the Indians and the English. He was sort of a mediator. He played both sides. He just wanted peace, and he wanted to make some money. So he converted to Christianity, and he warned the English that, look, these Indians in the Wampanoag, I might be part of them, but I feel bad for you guys because these guys are planning major hit-and-run attacks that are going to be coming in the next weeks. You didn't hear it from me. So the English freaked out, and they accused King Philip of, hey, you know, you're planning these attacks. What gives? Well, John Sassamon disappears, and they throw him in this lake after strangling him. And the body turns up the following spring, because they kind of slipped him under the ice. It was wintertime when they killed him in January. And when the body turned up, the English they find the murderers, they put the guy on trial. And when they put him on trial, they were found guilty and they were executed, which caused the war. And that also caused the English to ban them from using their muskets. So it's like they always give these half-ass stories, like, oh, well, they banned us from using our firearms. And it's like, yeah, well, you were planning major attacks. We did it the ban was temporary. It wasn't going to last very long. It's these little facts that they don't tell you at these museums in the area.
Yeah, and okay, so the other thing about that is the idea that they can't hunt because they don't have their muskets anymore.
Right.
Like, are you telling me that Indians can't hunt without a musket? Like,
Exactly.
like they've been
so
doing
for
it,
millennia.
Yeah, they hadn't done it for millennia without a musket. Now all of a sudden,
And it's not
they
even
have
like-
them and it get taken away.
Yeah. And I mean, okay, it's one thing if you took away a gun from like me and told me to shoot a deer with a bow and arrow, like I probably couldn't do it. But these people were hunting without muskets within living memory.
Right.
So it's
Right.
not like that knowledge has been lost by that point.
Right.
I think
but
it's
it goes to
interesting.
show.
Oh, go ahead. I'm sorry.
Yeah, they were sort of like using it as an excuse, essentially, because they were trying to find any excuse they could. So you have to remember that leftists especially are always looking for there's no transcendence with them, so they try to look for either an economic reason for things happening or something having to do with oppression or both. And the reality is, look, people back then, the average male had a little bit more healthier of a testosterone level, had more of a need to compete. Some people just wanted to fucking go to war. A lot of tribes actually, this sounds insane, but they found it fun. It's just what they did. They were warlike. That's what they did. They fought, and there were warlike tribes, and there were more peaceful tribes like
Paddy,
the Pequot.
This goes against the noble savage meme that we've been taught.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, these peaceful Indians, all they wanted to do was give us a cornucopia and like turkey and corn.
Right.
You know?
Yeah.
And
I love the like leftist version of Indian history where like the white man shows up and like they bring him like flowers and venison and he just knocks him out cold with a Bible. And,
he just beats him senseless with a Bible and then shoves a musket straight up his ass. You know,
right? Yeah, there really is a lack of nuance. There really is a lack of nuance in leftist history.
The other thing with the Indians you have to remember too is that they were basically living in many ways. You have a different race with a different IQ, different mindset, but also living very, very similar to how Gauls and the Norsemen and people like that lived hundreds and hundreds of years before, the Europeans of that time were living. So again, there was just war was in the blood. It was the way people are in the Arab world and, Persians and Empire, all these different cultures who just haven't come out of that dark age yet. It's not to say that we don't have this in our blood either. I mean, all people do, but we had the ability, Magna Carta was already around at that point. We had mastered ourselves and it had just started to really expand out into the world and really kind of, find our way as European people. And like I said, they can't use the excuse of empire because there was no British Empire at this point. So, I mean, yeah, they were colonists, but it wasn't, the people that were living there were dissenters, they primarily who pushed out the Anglicans. So they weren't really necessarily looking to expand in the way that, people of the empire were, at a later period or in the following century.
It seems almost like Australia in a way where it's just kind of where the refuse of society went. Yeah.
Pretty much. That's kind of what it was. And, to get back to what we were saying, why do we name our towns after these Indians and stuff? That's a very, very, very unique thing about the Anglosphere. Anywhere there's English-speaking people, whether they're English or Scottish or Welsh or Irish, we tend to kind of like, even though we find a sort of virtue in our enemy, and that kind of, not virtue, but we like
a respect.
The English in a very strange way, they were fascinated with you. They were afraid of them, but they were also fascinated with them. And, that's why a lot of them kind of sought out to convert some of them, which they did. The Choctaw were one of the first major Indian tribes to really embrace white stuff, like white culture and white religion and all that. Like and they still do to this day. A lot of Choctaw fought for the Confederacy proudly. In their own communities. They weren't even trying to assimilate. They wanted to be Choctaw, but they just, hey man, they kind of saw things the way that like a federation might be. Like, it was like a sovereign Indian state they wanted, but so I'm getting off topic. But anyway.
It's okay. We actually haven't been on topic for about 30 minutes. So it's okay.
I'm sorry. So yeah.
No, it's fine. No, we're setting up. What we're doing right now is we're setting up for the big second hour. is what we're doing, right? So we're getting ready.
The Choctaw.
Okay, cool.
Sorry, go ahead, John.
I was gonna say we're getting ready for the big second hour where we're doing the prehistory and the history of like why these things happen. In the second hour, we're gonna really get into the Salem Witch Trials and stuff. So, yeah.
Weren't the Choctaw one of the five civilized tribes? Is that
they were? Yes, they were.
One of the what tribes?
Yeah. They kind of.
There was something called
tribes.
the 5 civilized tribes. Basically, some Indians adopted more easily to European customs than others. I know the Cherokee were one, but I don't know the others.
Yeah, the Cherokee were another one. And the thing is the Indians did not look at themselves the way that, leftists often, funny enough, they always sort of go against they project and they go against their own stupid ideology when they view the Indians as being sort of like a pan-ethnic group, and the Indians themselves at that time didn't see themselves like that. Like, for example, the Abenaki, who were very much a big part of King William's War, which was the war after King Philip's War. The Abenaki did not see themselves as the equals of their enemies. Their enemies were subhuman to them. They didn't look at them as being even the same race. It's very strange how that can be, but like they didn't have this pan-ethnic identity. That didn't come later until the 1800s with Indians like Tecumseh, who tried to unify the tribes, and he failed because these other Indians were looking at him like, well, that's not my equal. Those are my enemies. We fought them for 200 plus years. I'm not siding with them. What are you, crazy? And
Tecumseh was like the idea of something.
Well, yeah, I mean,
he would have been considered like a communist nowadays, I think.
Yeah, very much so, but also pan-ethnic, pan-anything, like global, whatever word you want to use, any kind of collective identity, and as we know it as Europeans, for the greater good, the Indians did not possess, and they still don't to this day. They don't see themselves, like, the tribes will, I had a friend, I still have a friend, I'm not going to say his name, but he lives up in Alaska, and he's worked with the Tlingit Indians up there. For years, and he says they're very wonderful people, but they're just like so argumentative. They just live to argue, and like the slightest thing will cause a tribal scandal or crisis, and they'll just not. There's just a different way they deal with like diplomacy and with intertribal affairs than
they're not by
Europeans.
Chance Jewish, are they?
I don't think so.
I mean, they say they like to argue. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I mean, what was that weird theory that like the Indians were like the lost tribes of one of the lost tribes of Israel or something? I forget
who said that. That's a Mormon thing, isn't it?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. But yeah, it's fascinating how different time periods often, and it's like the Indians themselves have become so degenerated that they have bought the Jewish lie of, oh yeah, the white man screwed us over. It's like they allowed themselves to be so easily manipulated, and it couldn't be further from the truth. I mean, as savage as they were, there were some tribes that allied with us very well during wartime, and the English rewarded it and said, look, here's your little spot over there. Go happy hunting, whatever. Go do what you do, and it wasn't really a problem. Like I said, the Pequot after the 1630s were very much like that. They weren't a problem anymore. Thomas Jefferson wrote in his notes on the state of Virginia that most of what killed the Indians were two things: disease, which we know because their bodies were not used to a lot of the illnesses that we possessed as Europeans, which, by the way, they gave us diseases too. Gonorrhea, I believe, was given to us by the Aztecs.
That is true. That is true.
Yeah.
Spain. Thanks for that.
But the Indians also did themselves in because they couldn't unify. They infighting was just so rife among them. They didn't. Not only did they, it wasn't so much that they refused out of pride. They didn't know how. They just didn't see the world like that. They saw their own tribe as being their nation, and that was not the equal to, the Abenaki were not the equal to the Pequot. The Nashaway were not the equal to the Podunk, and so forth. So, but so anyway, so Salem, you get to now you're in the 1690s, and there's a war that's been going on since the 1680s, which we now call King William's War. And this was another big war. Western Massachusetts was heavily affected by this as well. This is when the war is starting to push further west into New England and parts of what is now New Hampshire. Deerfield in 1704, just after Salem Witch Trials happened, Deerfield was a really nasty raid. If you go there today, some of the homes are, well, not the original homes, like reconstructions of the original homes, but there's a few stones and foundations that were from the original homes that were there. But almost the entire village was burned. And you have to remember, too, towns back then were guarded by palisades. So you had like a fort, like basically guarding the town. So these Indians like had to get in somehow. And a lot of the times how they got in was because the English just sort of, they trusted too much. They would trust, allies of theirs, and the enemy would pay them off or whatever, and then they would open the gate for them, or, they would lure them in some way, because these forts aren't really easy to get into. So I think actually in Deerfield, they got lucky. They actually were able to get in through snow drifts because it was the dead of winter. And if you know anything about musketry, muskets don't really work as well in the wintertime because of the weather conditions. So winter was like the perfect time to do a raid.
Mm-hmm.
It was also an unsuspecting time. That's actually how, big turning point in the American Revolution was because Washington caught, the Hessians with their pants down. They weren't expecting, such a raid like that in the dead of winter during a snowstorm. So raids were, a really favorable kind of tactic for anyone at that time period. But anyway, so basically in Salem, the people are paranoid. They're PTSD'd. You have entire generations, about 2 generations deep now, that have grown up with nothing but Balkan style warfare, and it's just constant and it's all the time. And so they're freaked out, and their paranoia gets the best of them. Couple that with the religious aspect, and they basically, they viewed the Indians as demonic. So they took on this sort of ethereal among them.
Okay, so how did the whole thing start? I mean, I know we gave the background, but the Salem witch trial specifically, did it start from accusations of witchcraft, or was there something else involved?
You had a couple different events that led up to it. Samuel Parris, one of the main, characters in both, the fictional Crucible and also in actual history. He's a name that comes up a lot. He was actually, the main reverend of Salem. Mm-hmm. And he preached for the first time, I guess it was about 1689, 1690, going into that. And he was hired as the village minister. So he's kind of rising, in the ranks there and, in the clergy. And people didn't really know him that well. So they had to sort of trust him. With the war going on, you sort of had to sort of just, you had no other alternative. You sort of had to sort of trust, even though you were just paranoid and on edge all the time. And he had a daughter named Betty Parris and her cousin Abigail Williams, who Winona Ryder played in the movie. Right. And although in real life she was actually 11 years old, the Crucible it doesn't really have very much accuracy if you've ever read it.
Yeah, no, she was 11 when all this stuff started, right? Like she
was a kid,
quote unquote fits, where she was screaming and throwing stuff and making all sorts of weird noises and shit. Like little girls don't do that anyways,
Exactly, and you're basically it's a Puritan society that these people, kids growing up in any kind of hardcore cultish sort of society, which the Puritans were seen as such even by other English people living in the colonies at that time. People in Virginia thought the Puritans were weird. They would hear news about New England all the time, mm-hmm. And of course the legacy of the Puritans exists today with the liberal elite that are in Boston. The abolitionist movement was the descendants of, the Puritans. This is why, the puritanical ideas in Christianity, not Christianity, but specifically the Puritan sect, was very proto-leftist. It was a very kind of prelude to all the horrible things that would come later. I mean, you have to remember, the French revolutionaries were inspired to kill their king based on
mm-hmm.
what the Puritan England, the Puritans did in England a century before them. So
I know, in a lot of the alt-right, there's that whole, and I think it comes from the reaction, but the concept that modern leftism is essentially a direct descendant of New England Puritanism. So would you say that's an accurate thing in your opinion?
I would say there's definitely merit to that. There is truth to that. it's not the only thing, but it's definitely one of the main contributors, I would say. It definitely has its roots in some of that. It's definitely directly tied to it. I mean, if we look at Betty Paris, for example, one of the main things that she was diagnosed by her doctor, William Griggs was his name. And some people blame him for the trials because, he was the one that suggested it might be witchcraft, because they couldn't figure out any other reason why these girls were acting weird. But it started with her. And
hey, Patty, let's do this. We're coming up on the end of the first hour. So let's save all the good stuff for the members hour, where they have to pay $14.95 for it. Joking. Nobody has to pay shit. This is free content. But we are going to take a little bit of a break. We have Mr. Paddy Tarleton on, so we're going to have another one of Mr. Paddy Tarleton's songs. You want to tell us a little bit about it real quick?
Yeah, this is my latest one. It's going to be on my new album, which is, I don't have an exact date, but it's going to be out early summer on Mice Trap Records, and it's kind of my little dig at boomers. I know I was inspired by all the boomer posting, and I've always said the alt-right is the new counterculture, and I was very pleased to see that my generation is finally having a voice seeping into the mainstream that's attacking these boomer assholes, these boomer cocksuckers that have ruined everything for us. So, so this song is called "Hallelujah, I'm a Boomer."
All right. How do we feel about boomers around here, Scott?
I hope that they get their social security taken away and they have to eat cat food to survive.
That's fucking right. Yeah. All right. Hallelujah, I'm a Boomer. We'll be back in a little bit.
Israel is our greatest ally, and if you're not willing to fight for them, you don't deserve the benefits in our Constitution.
One evening in my condo, on my laptop just a-stewing, reading The Blaze in a Klonopin haze, a YouTube vid of viewing. There were Nazi frogs and racist blogs, oh how my heart was dropping, 'cause I don't mind Muslim migrants, if it ain't my head they're chopping. Hallelujah, I'm a boomer, I'm neoliberal scum. Got a mortgage paid and a Mexican maid, but I still call my kids bums. Hallelujah, I'm a boomer, and it's luxury or death. And I am the worst, 'cause it's Israel first, and the deficit, leave it for my kids. Hallelujah, I'm a boomer. Hallelujah, I'm a boomer, in a hypocrite's coma. Back in my day, I paid my way in a high school diploma. Hallelujah, I'm a boomer, got my 401k. And you kids shouldn't laugh or you'll feel my wrath. Get your manager to call me sir. Hallelujah, I'm a boomer. Hallelujah, I'm a boomer, damn it, I deserve respect. I was given a star economy while I made my kids a wreck. Hallelujah, I'm a boomer, so let's set this record straight. That this here song for the all wrong, love the USA or get out of my way. Hallelujah, I'm a boomer. Hallelujah, I'm a boomer, and your hatred makes me sick. My McMansions are lily white while yours are racially mixed. Hallelujah, I'm a boomer, David Starr before the flag. Though they're now the same and I am to blame, what you gonna do? Might as well be a Jew. Hallelujah, I'm a boomer.
Antifa are the real fascists.
All right, everybody, we're back. We are still the Paranormies presents the Ahnenerbe Hour. I'm still Johnny Monoxide with Scott Taylor and Paddy Tarleton. Mr. Bradshaw Wilson, his internet was burned at the stake, so he's not going to be joining us for the second hour. But speaking of being burned at the stake, we're going to get back into the Salem Witch Trials. We gave a bit of history in the first hour about why people might think witchcraft and stuff was like a real thing and whatever. But Paddy, let's talk about the witches and why and who and what and where and whatever.
Yeah, so in the first hour, we covered sort of like the mindset of the 17th century English colonists, the way that they viewed the world around them, the way that the politics that happened back in England that had transferred over to the colonies, and also, their relationship with the Indians around them. And so you have the Indian Wars, and then by the 1690s, there's a war already going on at that time, which is now known as King William's War. So you look at Salem, and it's one of the bigger towns there on the North Shore outside of Boston. And Samuel Parris was sort of he was the lead reverend in Salem at that time. He was hired basically as the village minister. He had a daughter by the name of Betty, and she had her cousin Abigail, was his niece, and they lived in a house together. They had a slave, Tituba, who is portrayed in some contemporary art as being black, even though in reality she was more than likely an Indian. Sort of, I guess, kind of like the Amerindian. I think she was from Barbados, and so she had kind of that Afro kind of, that Afrocentric sort of, island voodoo sort of, I don't know exactly what specific sect, she, it's just like a black or like an Indian folk religion. I guess I'm saying like she wasn't black, and now I'm saying like, I know, contradicting myself here. The island of Barbados had a mixture. I mean, there was the blacks, and then there was the Indians that were on there, and their religions sort of were intertwined at this time. This sort of crossover with non-whites, sort of, kind of like the way like the Puerto Ricans have Santeria and certain parts of the island. It's like Catholicism mixed in with so in Barbados you had like the Indians that were native to the region with the black slaves. Some of them, their religion kind of overlapped a little bit. And, these things get taken, when they go with them, wherever they go in the New World this time. So naturally, the Puritans saw that as evil and satanic. So, people like Tituba would kind of keep it on the hush hush. But when Betty Parris, as we were explaining in the first hour, Samuel Parris's daughter had fallen ill, and she started having these strange fits. One of the big things that she would do is she would be like appear like in a catatonic state. Like if you've ever seen the movie Awakenings with Robert De Niro, it was kind of like that. But there's never been any, diagnosis that historians have ever given her. In the 1970s, they were saying that it was ergot poisoning it was like something on the grain that was causing people to hallucinate, which of course is complete bullshit. Mary Beth Norton is an author, and she wrote I think she's still alive. She's pretty up there in years, but she wrote a book called In the Devil's Snare. And to this day, it's one of the most informative books about the witch trials, because it ties as we were talking about in the first hour, the effect that the Indian Wars had on the mindsets. These people, living in Salem, these people believed in witches. But the difference is, and what makes Salem so interesting is, why did these people get so hysteric with executing people for the crime of witchcraft? Because at the time, in a lot of other villages in other parts of the world, in the European world, specifically the Anglosphere, to be accused of witchcraft was definitely a heinous thing. It would have been kind of like being accused of, being a pedophile today, or like, something like being accused of a racist to liberals. But it wasn't something that you would be executed for, not all the time. It could happen, but most of the time it didn't. You would pay a fine, but the only thing that sucked is it was on your record for the rest of your life. And no one wanted that, especially to people who are as devoutly Protestant as the Puritans were. So, we're about in 1692 now, and this is the winter time, and she starts having these fits. He doesn't know what to do, so he calls up the doctor, this fellow by the name of William Griggs, and he diagnosed her as having, he didn't say that it was witchcraft, but he said that it was a possibility, but he didn't want to jump to conclusions. Well, you're living in a village, and we all know what happens in small towns. Somebody says something that, well, this could be, potentially this is what's going on. And all of a sudden it escalates and it snowballs, and everybody starts saying, oh my God, there's witches everywhere. And people were already frightened of the Indians and sort of had this demonic association with them. His servant, the slave that they had, Tituba, her husband, having that kind of folklore, like that, Indian Afro sort of combined, folklore thing going on. They helped another girl in the village make what was, I guess what they called a witch cake. I don't know what they called it at the time period. Historians today call it a witch cake. They may or may not have called it back then. But what it was, I don't remember exactly the specific way to make one because I've never done it. But what I've read is that you basically you get everybody involved with trying to fix the girl to basically piss in this cake, and then you bake it and you feed it to a dog. And something like the dog. It's really
gross,
weird.
Actually,
the dog either vomits it up or takes a shit. There's something that like has to do with like the dog ingesting it, and the excrement is sort of like you're supposed to be able to. It's supposed to cure the person of whatever. It's kind of like goes back to the old idea of like scapegoat. Everybody would sort of it's this catharsis. You would sort of spill your problems onto the goat, and then they would slaughter the goat. So it's kind of like that mindset. Go ahead. I think you were ready to speak.
Or swing a chicken above your head like the Jews do today.
Well, was that Purim that they do that for?
I don't know. It's just the sin chicken. I don't know what.
Oh, the sin chicken.
That's
right.
For.
The only religion that's allowed to mutilate animals in public in New York. Yeah. It's weird.
Well, nobody could really figure out what was going on with Betty Paris. Now, at this time, it was only Betty Paris that was acting this way. Nobody was really doing it. There was another girl in the village who was older than the rest of them, because the average age was about 11 to maybe 14, 15. But this girl was about 18 or 19, and her name was Elizabeth Hubbard. And she funny enough, she was the Dr. William Griggs that I'd mentioned. It was his. I don't think it was his daughter. I think she was his servant. But either way, she was living with him, and she started doing weird fits. Now, it's just it's not a coincidence that the doctor says this could possibly be witchcraft. No other girls in the village are acting weird yet, and now all of a sudden, his daughter, Elizabeth, is acting weird now. She heard it from her father. So, obviously that's why, so it just goes to show, I mean, this whole thing gets blown out of proportion, but it's girls being, PTSD'd refugee girls from the Indian Wars being, you couple that with already the innate female, young female nature, their natural tendency to get, want attention basically. And that's kind of what you had. It's just sort of spread. They did examine Tituba at a place called Ingersoll's Ordinary, which was another name for a tavern. And that building is still there to this day in Danvers. If you go there, it's right across the street from an elementary school. And I've been there, and I can't go in. You can't go inside of it, unfortunately, because it's a private residence to this day. But the house is pretty preserved from the outside, the way that it looked at the time. And it's really cool to look at that and picture, like, wow, that what would that have been like when they examined her for witchcraft? Well, Tituba gets scared shitless that she's going to hang for this because they're threatening her. So she just admits to it that, oh yeah, I'm a witch, and she sort of makes up this story that one of the common themes that are in court reports of court documents of the time is that they would say the notion of red bread. They said that the devil would present a meal to me. He would bid me eat this meal of red bread and red wine, and this theme keeps coming up of red. The red is sort of associated with black and red is associated with the devil, and of course, it's no coincidence that black and red are also associated with the Indians. This is the colors that they use when they're conducting these raids. So she admits to it, and then of course all hell breaks loose. The whole thing escalates. Over the winter, several other people get accused. The girls, most of these girls knew each other before coming to Salem, because they came from places like Casco Bay in Maine and Kittery, Maine, and a lot of these fishing towns off the coast of Maine as refugees. Mercy Lewis was one of those girls. She was the one that I mentioned. She watched her, I think it was her grandmother or her aunt get raped and then dragged into the woods. They never saw her again. And then other family members she had were made slaves. So Salem being one of the more sizable villages, they actually had room to take in refugees. And that's what they did. And, three bumpkin girls, as they called them, these frontier girls, just started causing problems immediately. And, trying to garner attention from everybody.
Right. Well, when people think of witches and like the Salem Witch Trial, like I'm pretty sure most people think of witches in the double boiling trouble, the witches in their cauldrons.
Yeah.
The
Shakespeare sort of image,
Shakespearean, with the warts on their nose and the big black hats and whatever. These were little girls. These were ages like 9 to 13, 14 years old.
Oh yeah, and their stories are absolutely like they're funny to us if you look back at it, but they were like really terrifying to people during the time period. Abigail Hobbs, who was another girl. Abigail was a very common name for. There's a million Abigails in the trials alone. Abigail Hobbs confessed in the spring that the devil recruited her as a witch in Maine in the year 1688, which of course, as I mentioned before, was the year that King William's War broke out. Right. And that was in northern New England. And she was basically still, suffering from the shock of, the attacks that were going on. There was a big attack in York that happened that scared the shit out of everybody. That wasn't very far away. Had everybody on edge. So she started saying that the devil sort of recruited her almost as like I want to say there was this notion that the devil and the Indians were sort of working hand in hand. And that was what the court of, first of all, the name of the court, they established Court of Oyer and Terminer was the official name. And they appointed judges. And these judges basically, it's embarrassing looking back on his history, but there wasn't really any idea in the Puritan mindset of why a little girl would lie. And I know that sounds ridiculous to us because, of course, if any, we as men have our faults, but shit, man, come on, fucking women lie all the time, and they're little girls. They're little girls that are finally somebody's giving them attention. So
especially after having been through like the stuff out in the frontier with the Indian Wars and being attacked by these plagues of black and red painted shaved head orcs, basically, or devils. Literally when she said she made a pact with the devil or whatever. That could have been an Indian as far as we know. Like black and red. Right. Yeah.
Right. Well, the other thing was the very first people that the girls started accusing were old people. Bridget Bishop was one of those people, and Sarah Osborne. These were older, and these were sort of like, what's the word I'm looking for? I don't want to say fragile, but people that were kind of on their way out anyway. So I think there was maybe a justification in their minds of like, oh well, who gives a shit? They're old people anyway. They're gonna die, so. I'm have a bit of fun with it. They're already PTSD'd. So, and they were, literally, these people would have been, if they were diagnosed today and they were living today, there's no doubt in my mind that any psychologist would probably diagnose them as suffering from post-traumatic stress disorder, like severe, like the way somebody would in a war zone. And you couple that with the underdeveloped mind of a child and its knack to sort of go wild with imagination, because all they know is the religion that they've been taught. They eat, sleep, and breathe Puritanism. So, and they're already a rejected culture anyway by their, what Anglicans called the mother country, England. They're already seen as rejects by their own, country because of their religion, because they're associated with being king killers, regicides, that people still hadn't gotten over that yet. You can sort of liken it to, the propaganda of the Jewish propaganda of World War II. And you still have these people in the 1990s and even today in 2017 that get so their imaginations run wild with the Holocaust and with camps and everything. So, these people were just sort of, yeah.
Oh, there was an eagle and a bear in a cage. And the bear would tear you to pieces and then the eagle would pick your bones. Really? Really? We're gonna do the Paranormies are gonna do a Hollow Hoax episode eventually.
I honestly don't know how we haven't yet.
Yeah, exactly. Like we tease it every episode pretty much. But anyways,
Sandy Hook usually do.
Jim Fetzer, if you're fucking paying attention, like you gotta Jim Fetzer, you have to come on, dude, stop it.
Jim.
Yeah. Okay. So what does Cotton Mather have to do with all of this?
Oh, Cotton Mather, man, he's an interesting guy. Cotton Mather, actually, he wrote now I'm drawing a blank here. He wrote he was a very well-known figure at the time.
Mm-hmm.
He was the son of Increase Mather, who was a very well-respected.
Was it Wonders of the Invisible World?
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
But there was a few books he actually wrote. And he was the son of Increase Mather. You know, these Puritans had weird names, man.
Yeah, exactly.
That was his dad's
Increase had Increase begat cotton, begat polyester, begat
He was basically known as a pamphleteer. Like, he was like the guy who was putting out books. Like, he was like, I'm trying to compare him to somebody today. Like, he just was he was one of those authors that was just as popular in life as he was in death. You know, he was born in Boston. Increase was born over in England.
Was Cotton Mather a reverend too? Like,
yeah, he was. Yeah, he was a religious leader too. He was another one with a wild imagination. So, and a political gripe against the Anglicans. I mean, he was a diehard Puritan. He fucking hated the monarchy. He wanted, you know, this was a part of a group of people that wanted to see England return to the Cromwellian Republic of the Protectorate. So this guy wrote about like 400 some books and pamphlets in his life, and a lot of them revolved around, you know, theology and you know, all sorts of stuff, you know, the invisible world and, you know, demons and hell and all that shit, you know. He influenced a lot of early American science, I guess you could say, in the early 1700s. He did one of the first recorded experiments with plant hybridization. He also was I think it was him. Yeah, it was him. It wasn't Increase. It was him that had something to do with inoculation, which would be, you know, vaccines. It was sort of the prelude to vaccines.
Right.
He had sort of revolutionized that and introduced it.
Interesting.
Yeah.
He was a big proponent.
He was pretty much
he supported the prosecutions of the witches, though, right?
Oh, very much so. In fact, he was the big, the governor and a lot of other people were dead set against what was known as spectral evidence. And spectral evidence, I could go on about it like in detail, but what it was like roughly is it is this stupid. So brace yourself. It's basically the concept that if somebody says my apparition, you know, such and such sent their apparition to choke me in the middle of the night, that's considered spectral evidence. That's actually considered evidence in their eyes. They would use that in court against people.
Yeah, he has a quote. It says, "Do not lay more stress on pure spectral evidence than it will bear. It's very certain that the devils have sometimes represented the shapes of persons not only innocent, but also very virtuous, though I believe that the just God then ordinarily provides a way for the speedy vindication of the persons thus abused." So basically, he was like, no, spectral evidence is real. Just go with it.
Yeah.
Just go with it. Yeah.
Yeah. Like, it's real. Just don't abuse it too much. Like, it.
Right.
Wow, that's insane. That's just insane to me.
Yeah.
And you got to remember is that these people weren't getting a charter renewed initially from the monarch. So, and the monarchy itself was always kind of back and forth between, you know, you're coming out of the English Civil War. And everybody's on edge. During the 1690s, there was, you know, this is after the Stuart dynasty had ended. So it seemed like, you know, Protestantism was getting more and more radical by that time period. You know, and that had a profound effect on, and no offense to any Protestants out there. It's not what I don't mean it in a generic way like that. I just mean that it was directly tied with political movements. It was very, very much political as it was religious, you know, which anybody that studies theology knows. I mean, I'm preaching to the choir here with that, but
right.
But yeah, you're talking about the executions of, like, you know, God, I mean, it was like between 1692 and 63 and 1692 and 1693, you know, it culminated in the executions of like 20 people. There were others that died in jail. But it just, it created, it seems so silly to us now that something like that could get out of hand. But if you do understand the politics of the era and why these things are happening, like it's easy to kind of see how these people let, you know, this shit go off the rails the way they did, you know?
Yeah, it seems like today, like the liberal interpretation of history would be something like, oh, this is what happens when people are religious or something like that.
Which is of course is ridiculous. I mean, there the Puritans, for all their silliness, I would say were, in reality, they were more politically fucked than they were religious. It was only really that period. And again, you know, it goes back to what I was saying. I know we keep returning to this, but why did people that were accused of witchcraft before that not really, you know, they only maybe did a few years in jail or a few months in jail and paid a fine and then they were out, versus, right, well, why in Salem were they hanging all these people and torturing them with, you know, these very intense interrogations and threatening their families? And it's because the people were just freaked out. They'd had enough. Mm-hmm. You know, they were just, they were exhausted psychologically and emotionally.
Well, some of the things, I mean, excuse me, even some of the things that, like, they said that, like, what made such and such a person a witch. Like, for example, like Bridget Bishop.
Yeah.
She was brought to trial for, okay, these were her charges. Not living a Puritan lifestyle because she wore black clothing. And it was against the Puritan code. Like, literally, that's literally what she wore, black. So that's why she's a witch. Yeah. Okay, so, yeah, along with her quote-unquote immoral lifestyle, she went to trial and was convicted the same day. Like literally, like, it was like, nope, she's a witch. It reminds me of that Monty Python sketch. You know, it's like, we found a witch, maybe burn her. You know, well, she looks like a witch. You know, it's like, well, you know, well, you dressed me like this, okay, fine, but she has got a wart. You know what I mean? It's like, what? You know, it's like some of these things, like you were saying earlier, these are just girls who have, like you said, were out on the frontier, who were tortured and had seen atrocities committed by these orc-like Indians, and now they're just not fitting into society, into this quote-unquote civilized Salem township or whatever, you know?
You mentioned Bridget Bishop. We're coming up on her anniversary of her death. She was executed June 10th of 1692. So now, you know, this is like, you know, I suck at math, but, you know, this is like the 300 some, you know, anniversary of like right now that would have been when the trials were happening.
Yeah,
and
it's like,
you know,
320 something years, yeah.
325.
Yeah,
Oosh, 325.
And
that's a good number.
Even though there were only about, I guess, well, technically there were 19 that were hanged, because there was Giles Corey. He was pressed to death. So they like put a wooden, you know, like I think it was a door actually they had over his chest.
Yeah, it's like he squeezed them like grapes.
Yeah. But there were 20 people that were executed, but there were over 200 who were accused. So that's the scary part. So while it's going on, no one knew at the time how many people were actually going to end up dying as a result of it. You know, it's only 20 did, but, you know, these are 20 people who, you know, that we know now. I mean, you know, I don't know anybody that literally, even ultra, you know, the most orthodox Christian, I think would even admit that the people of Salem were not fucking witches. I mean, not really. I mean,
right. And as much as like we know witches, like, quote unquote, today.
Yeah. I mean, they certainly weren't Wiccans, though. I mean, that's the other thing the liberals always sort of say, oh, they were practicing European folk religion. No, they weren't.
No, they weren't. No, they weren't.
They most certainly weren't. These were Puritans. This wasn't something they would have risked. There were Anglicans that lived there that maybe had herbal remedies for, like, you know, a cough or something, but there was nobody that was conjuring spirits seriously. I mean, the girls, yes, there is strong evidence that supports the fact that Tituba, with, you know, with the witch cake and, you know, frolicking in the woods and things like that, but it wasn't to the extent that pop culture sort of made it out to be. Most of these girls would not have had very much knowledge of that. They just wouldn't have known about it.
Mm-hmm. Well, some of them were guys. You've got John Willard, George Burroughs, George Jacobs, and John Proctor. You know, Samuel
Burroughs
Wardell.
was seen as, and this is sort of the thing that blows the feminist theory out of the water, is that, like, Burroughs was actually sort of seen as the ringleader. Mm-hmm. He was like the guy. He was the one they really wanted to go after. You know, that he was. They viewed him as like the one after him. Well, see, this is where, like, the politics of the town sort of ties into it. I mean, he was the only minister that was executed for it, and at that time, by the time he was accused, you had people that sort of, there was no way out of like to get people off your back. So like, you know, if you weren't like with Bridget Bishop, she wasn't seen as being Puritan enough, so she was killed. Well, a guy like Burroughs and even Giles Corey, he accused his own wife. I mean, he accused Martha. It was his own wife that he loved. He accused her of being a witch. I guess there's no real nobody's ever proven why he did it. Could have been just to get the authorities off his back. To me, hey, look, if I accuse my wife, they won't fuck with me. You have to remember
his wife.
Well, it could have been that too. But with George Burroughs, it was sort of seen as, well, he's like the religious leader. I mean, who's to say? The more religious you are, wouldn't that be the perfect, person to sort of hide the fact that they're satanic, that they're in league with the devil, is to appear to be so pious and to be like very religious,
like a Kafka trap, where no matter what route you take to try to prove your innocence, it's more evidence that you're guilty.
Mm-hmm.
And Burroughs was also really kind of like overly confident. He was a guy that was he was a go-getter, pissed a lot of people off in the process. Kind of a ladies' man when he was younger. A lot of women kind of, were. There's no evidence that I've ever read of him like having affairs with anyone, but he was well liked by women though for his time. So he's kind of seen as like a let's I guess there was like a jealousy sort of thing you could say could have been, one of the reasons why they sort of targeted him. Wasn't the only reason, but it added to it.
Like a Chad kind of guy.
Yeah, I guess you could say that. Maybe an appearance.
It was kind of like an intellectual Chad, though.
Yeah, a big brain Chad.
A big brain Chad, yeah. Yeah, I got that.
Yeah, Cotton. This kind of also comes into play where how much of a bastard Cotton Mather was, because when Burroughs was about to die, he recited the Lord's Prayer successfully without stumbling, and the Puritans viewed that as there's no way that you could be in league with the devil if you were able to do that without stumbling. I mean, it's completely fucking ridiculous, but that's what they viewed. And this is pointed out to Cotton Mather afterwards, like, well, hey, he just did this right before we hanged him. What gives? I mean, shouldn't he not be able to do that? And the religious leaders sort of was, oh, well, these things can happen, it's making up these sort of excuses as to why. Oh, it's not, just don't pay attention. The devil is basically getting so, his long story short, his excuse was, well, the devil is so strong here. And this is going to be ground zero for, possibly the apocalypse. We don't know. So the devil is getting so strong that he's now able to override that. And now people can say it successfully. I mean, this is how crazy that people were getting. That they just were making the rules up as they went along, It's
kind of like liberals do today.
Yes, exactly. I'm glad. Yeah.
They move the goalposts. They change the rules. They make shit up. Yeah.
Yeah.
It's almost as if. Never mind. Yeah. They've been doing.
Well,
this
and
forever.
the other thing is Burroughs. Yeah, and Burroughs was also, and this is where the politics come into play. He was based on the accusation of personal enemies he already had within several congregations. It was actually a congregation he used to work for, that he was part of. They'd sued him for money that, like, they said that he owed. And, these things come into play with a lot of, you see this with some of the families in Salem too, were sort of accusing each other, like the Putnams. They were accused that you had. Have you ever seen the film with Kirstie Alley? Like, there's another Salem movie that they made that after the Crucible one in the 90s, and like the Crucible one kind of shows more of like the fun, like demonic stuff and all that. I mean, that like and like the whole thing with Abigail being a whore and everything. Well, the one with Kirstie Alley they did was less popular, and it was supposed to be a little more historically accurate. It didn't have very much funding, so it kind of sucked. But it showed the sort of the infighting between people in the town and people that were sort of kind of disillusioned with the Puritans, with the church at that point, because things had gone off the rails so much that they, were sort of like John Proctor, for example, was one such person. He got less and less religious as, with the advent of the trials. to the point where he wasn't going to church at all. And then that was grounds to accuse him of being a possible, satanic. See, you had a lot of people who were basically convinced that Satan was recruiting an army for the end times. That's what they believed. And they believed that because the Indian Wars got so bad, they figured, well, we must be living in the end times. That was their world. So, it wasn't just, the devil is fucking everybody up in the head just for shits and giggles. He was fucking up everybody in the head because he was recruiting an army. That's the way they saw it.
Right.
So what kind of made this whole thing die down? Like, when did everyone come to their senses? Like, did enough people just kind of die that everyone realized it was ridiculous, or did the girl stop accusing people, or like what happened there? Nobody knew that it was going to die. Like, people thought that this was going to keep going and going and going. And they weren't really keeping much contact with back home in England. And the charter kept getting renewed, and then it would, they would lose the charter, and then England would revoke the charter. This kept happening during the Indian Wars, when they kept having to renew these charters with England to get all sorts of things like supplies, help, militia training, all sorts of things. The governor at the time period was a guy by the name of William Phipps, and he was appointed governor of Massachusetts just before the trials broke out. And this guy was a veteran. He already fought in the Indian Wars previously. So he kind of was somebody that was more grounded in reality. He eventually stepped in and intervened and basically put an end to it. So it was as simple as that. And the trials died. If they didn't gradually sort of kind of taper off, they almost died overnight. Okay.
Interesting.
Well,
yeah,
the reason,
and just went away.
Well, the reason why is because one of the girls, I don't remember which one it was, she accused Phipps's wife, and that was the last straw. It was these little bitches are out of hand now. They're accusing my wife. What the fuck?
Right.
Yeah. So.
Interesting.
Okay. That's just, I don't know. The whole thing is just very interesting. Just the atmosphere of it and the backdrop of when it happened, because you don't really learn that when you learn about, I know we learned a little bit about it in school, not much, but when I was in high school, I think for English class or something, we learned a little bit about the witch trials, but it was always portrayed as religion gone out of control, or they just took they read the Bible too much one day and just went crazy.
Right.
No, they always chuck it up to religion. Actually, before the trials, the Puritans were not. There's this rumor that they were prudes with sex. Actually, the funny thing is, one could argue the Anglicans were a little worse at the time period. The Puritans actually encouraged a healthy sex life. They talked about it all the time. Wow. It just had to be between you and your wife. But they actually would have people that I don't know if they ever had a name, but they were people that were appointed, trusted friends of families that would basically kind of stop by to make sure, not in these words, but that you were banging your wife, and keeping her happy.
Making
because
sure
your wife
was
could
going
actually,
on okay. Yeah.
Well, your wife could actually divorce you in their society. She could, on the grounds that she wasn't happy, that she wasn't being
really,
she wasn't living a healthy life.
Well, that kind of goes back to their whole, I don't want to say commie, but the whole thing of everyone being more equal and an abolition of hierarchy that I think they might be kind of prone to do.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and Phipps was also the governor, to take it back to him. He was a really grounded dude. I mean, he was very familiar with the Indians. He'd done business with them. He'd fought them. He'd made pacts with he knew people that did. He didn't really care that much about religion. He cared about religion. He was a spiritual man. Most people were. Atheism wasn't really a thing you had guys back in England, you had guys like John Wilmot, for example, who were notorious atheists, but they were completely ill, mental crazy cases, even for the time period. This guy was a libertine. I mean, he was, this is during the Stuart era, the Restoration, when Charles II was back on the throne. So, I mean, there were atheists back then. It wasn't that Phipps was an atheist. It's just that he just didn't give much regard for religious ritual and for, attending, observing the Sabbath, for example. That was one of the big problems a lot of people didn't like about him. A lot of the Puritan leaders didn't like him because he didn't observe the Sabbath very often. But, he was an official, so nobody questioned it. Until the girls had, suggested that maybe his wife was in on the witch trials, and then he stepped in and finally, he marches into the courtroom one day and he just basically tells them off. Says, look, just knock it off. In different words, of course, but
right.
He's like, this is going to end. We're sick of it. We're tired of it.
Yeah.
So.
So that's interesting how, I don't know. It's just, the whole thing's really interesting to me, just because of how quickly it seemed like it started and ended. Like, it's just a manifestation of,
it came up
of a group of kids, basically.
It came up almost instantly, and it died off like as fast as it came up. Like there were
and
I mean, like you were saying earlier, there were other cases of like witchcraft or whatever that were prosecuted. 1647, there was the one in Connecticut. There was one in like 1660 something, 1680 something. But this was like a rash of them really quickly in a small area all at once.
Now, were these witch trials, did they become famous way after the fact, or was it kind of pretty well known immediately, like amongst the surrounding areas and such?
At the time period, it wasn't. It was absolutely known, both in the colonies and back home in England. I mean, people. It was in the newspaper in London all the time. I mean, people were very familiar with what was happening, and they were shocked by it. Virginians, especially, were like, "What the fuck are they doing up there?" I mean, nobody liked the Puritans.
Right. And
that was one of the big things that sort of Phipps's own words were that the court of Oyer and Terminer must fall, which for the period were quite extreme words, for an official to say something a bit vulgar and crass, like it's got to fall, like it needs to be crushed, basically. And when he said that, he wasn't just talking about the court itself. He was talking about Puritan control in Boston as a whole, because it was just getting so insane. These people already had a nasty reputation. So yeah, I mean, and by that point, you get to about 1704, and now you're in Queen Anne's War, which was, that's the war that was going on at that period. Was another Indian war that the Indians were caught sort of in a proxy war between the French and the English. And by this point, the French were openly hiring Indians to go conduct these raids. And once you get to that point, Puritan control in places like Boston started to die out, and the Puritan sect became weaker and weaker. Till about 1710, they had no influence anymore. So you could almost argue that guys like Phipps were very instrumental in ending Puritan control in many facets of New England life. But of course, this mindset manifested in different movements. We see it in the abolitionist movement. Very much, I would say, descendants.
Ask any Southerner, and they'll tell you how the abolitionists basically, couldn't mind their own business. It seems kind of the same way here, where it's just a group of people that just, can't leave well enough alone.
Yeah, Phipps was also very merciful. He pardoned a lot of girls, and it sort of forced them to give these written and or spoken apologies to people's families and such. Most of the girls, we don't really know what happened to a lot. Some of them we know that they went on to have families and they lived very full lives, mostly in places like Connecticut, Rhode Island, a lot in Western Massachusetts. The worst of the worst, like if you look at Abigail Williams, nobody knows what happens to her. The rumor is she became a prostitute in Boston, but a lot of them did actually, because they already had this on their record. So it's kind of like being accused of being a witch. Now you have on your record, not your record, but like your reputation for the period. You know, they didn't have a record like we would have a record today, but your reputation in those days was much more of a thing than it is now. I mean, today, you know, you can be a total degenerate and, you know, make a porno and, you know, look at the Cash Me Outside girl. You know, that girl's like financially like, you know, she's like set right now. I mean, you know, until she bombs all her money on drugs and, you know, has to go into porn, and then she ends up killing herself, overdosing on Xanax.
That little half Jewess.
Yeah, but back then you couldn't do that shit. You know, once you fucked up, you fucked up. So, your reputation was all you had, and once it's been tainted and tarnished, for a woman, I mean, what's she gonna do? Nobody's gonna marry her. You know, some of them did marry. Abigail Williams is rumored to have become a prostitute in Boston. Elizabeth Hubbard was, I think she went on to marry. Many of the girls that came from Maine ended up in Boston as prostitutes, though. But then after that, no one knows.
Yeah. Well,
so,
I mean,
yeah.
Surely they didn't get married after they became prostitutes, you know?
Yeah. No, I wouldn't imagine. Prostitutes in Boston at that time, just like anywhere, died by age 25. I mean, they didn't live very long.
Right.
Yeah.
It seems like the witch trials are almost kind of a microcosm of the society at a whole, of, you know, the whole society at the time, as far as just the insanity of these Puritans.
Yeah. Yeah, and they were insane. They were viewed, I mean, even in like, if you look at Plymouth, for example, right? Plymouth, you know, being founded in the early part of the 17th century, you know, Anglican military leaders like Miles Standish, who was very kind of similar to a guy like Phipps, you know, very grounded. He was religious. He believed in God, but he didn't have that, the politics fused with this egalitarian, you know, vengeful sort of bitter, you know, political notions sort of fused in with his faith. You know, it's why the royalists during the English Civil War were, you know, they tend to be, even if today, like if you go to England and you watch a historical war reenactment of the English Civil War, it's no surprise why most of the people portraying the Roundheads, the parliamentarians, tend to be real life liberals. And then vice versa, you have most of the people that portray royalists in reenactments over there tend to be people like us. I mean, you know, that war sort of keeps popping up in history, you know.
Yeah. And, isn't there some, I don't know, there's some book that talks about how the American Civil War was kind of a indirect continuation of the English Civil War, but I can't remember the name of it off the top of my head.
Oh, what did it say it again?
Basically, the theory that this book puts out is that the American Civil War was basically an indirect continuation of the English Civil War.
Yeah, very much so. Very much so. I mean, one of the nicknames that Robert E. Lee had after his death was the Last Cavalier, they called him. And it's interesting. There's a traditional song that the Confederates sang during the American Civil War, and I cannot remember for the life of me. I wish I could, because I'm on the show talking about it now. I sound like an idiot, but me being the folk music guy, I can just start, you know, like usually pull these songs right up out of my head. I can't remember which song it was, but it was a Confederate version of a Yankee song, because, you know, these melodies were essentially used by everyone. They just had their own versions. Like Yankee Doodle was a version of, you know, so.
Well, there was a Yankee version of Dixie as well.
Yes, there was. The first verse was way down south in the land of traders with bugs and snakes and alligators, run away, run away, run away to Dixieland. But this Confederate song referred to the Yankees as Puritans. In the verse, they actually called them that. It's in the lyrics if you find it online. I found it a couple years ago, so it shouldn't be too hard to find. But they actually referred to them as Puritans. You know, so it's something about you sons of Puritans or something like that. So yeah, it was very much seen in the Anglosphere. This same war keeps popping up, And we keep seeing it. And of course, now it's expanded into the entire Western world. But this idea of transcendent, traditional, very, I don't want to say right wing, because I mean, it goes beyond that, but it's very traditional kind of, I don't want to say reactionary either, because I wouldn't say the alt-right is reactionary. I mean, we're very much the new counterculture, but it's like what Pat Buchanan said in The Death of the West. I mean, the new counterculture is going to be the it's complete opposite of what the left was in the 60s. But what we're seeing is, with the left then, this war of like what people like the Roundheads and what the Federals had represented during the American Civil War to an extent, and what, one could even argue during the American Revolution. I mean, the Loyalists, sort of like were, for their time period, the traditionalists. I mean, the Patriots. I mean, look, truth is truth. They confiscated.
Thomas Paine was basically a complete hippie,
Oh,
like even today, he's pretty far to the left.
Absolutely.
Like I've literally seen communists praise Thomas Paine. I'm not even joking.
Yeah, it's the left's love for Paine is confusing at best. Like I don't get it, but yeah, he's a hippie.
Well, if you look at a lot of his positions on things, it's not entirely confusing. Like he went to France, I think, after the American Revolution and became a revolutionary in France. And I mean, that was a completely different story compared to the American Revolution. Like they lost their fucking minds. So.
Well, that's interesting you bring that up, because Thomas Jefferson is one of the founding fathers I absolutely don't really have a lot of respect for. I respect him as a brilliant philosopher. I think he was a great writer. In addition to being a terrible orator, which he described himself as, he was a fucking crazy, absolute nut roll fanatic when it came to politics. He was one of our worst presidents of that period.
Well, Thomas Jefferson, yeah. Thomas Paine is who I'm referring to. I didn't know if you thought I said Jefferson.
No. I know you're talking about Thomas Paine, but you mentioned the French Revolution. I thought you mentioned, because you did bring up Jefferson with the French Revolution, correct?
Oh, no, I brought up Thomas Paine because I think, I might be wrong, but I think he actually did go to France. I think he
Jefferson did that as well.
Oh, did he? Okay, I didn't know that.
Yeah, I apologize if I did a little bit of a brain fart there. But yeah, Jefferson actually, not only did he go to France during the Revolution, he was present in Paris for the storming of the Bastille. And he was there. He was a consultant for the Declaration of the Rights of Man. He actually was one of the main guys, but he actually told the revolutionaries in Paris at the time, the Jacobins, he told them to not credit him officially as a consultant, as an advisor for these ideas, because he didn't want to ruin his career back in America. And he almost did. Washington did not like Jefferson very much. Washington saw him as a bit of an upstart. It actually strained his relationship with John Adams too. Yeah.
See, I didn't actually know this part about that.
Yeah. Thomas Jefferson actually invited, I can't remember his name because I don't speak French, so my pronunciation of French names is very bad. He invited a French ambassador while the terror was happening to come and meet with the president, who was Washington at that time. And this is a little bit actually after the terror, so it's not quite during the terror. The terror just started to die off, but essentially what Jefferson wanted to do was he wanted to import this style of revolution into the United States, as scary as that sounds. And he was, a lot of these French guys, he was letting into the country sort of like on the hush hush, and they were recruiting Americans sort of conduct these mock demonstrations in American streets. There was one such that was conducted in Philadelphia where they were doing mock guillotine executions and saying that, the American Revolution must continue. Because the whole concept of the French Revolution, according to guys like Robespierre and Saint-Just, was that permanent revolution, which of course guys like Trotsky and Lenin adopted later on, that in order to maintain a equal society and liberty, this vague concept of liberty, you have to keep the terror going. You have to keep the insanity going. You have to keep.
Jefferson wanted a war every 20 years.
Yeah,
that was one of his famous quotes.
Yeah.
which, I mean, this seems a little excessive to me, but if you're coming from a mindset of permanent revolution, you know, it makes sense to see that that's why he's saying that.
Well, he took that from the French. That was one of Saint-Just's ideas, which was permanent revolution. That's what, you know, when all the guys in the committee of public safety sort of got together, and they, you know, sort of asked themselves, I can't remember who it was specifically. One of them asked Robespierre and Saint-Just, who were like arguably the two most vicious ones. They asked them and said, well, when does this end? Like, when do the heads stop being lopped off? Because Marat is dead. You know, that you had the guy Marat, you know, who was killed in the tub by Charlotte Corday, stabbed with a kitchen knife. And, you know, things were getting so out of hand that even now some of the officials were being murdered. Like, you know, guys who were involved in the government were being targeted because, you know, the killings wouldn't stop. And the answer was never. You know, Robespierre was like, they're never going to stop. We're never going to stop hacking off heads. We have to keep this going. And if we stop hacking off heads, then we'll start doing something else. But we have to keep the public afraid if we want to maintain liberty.
Right. Yeah, you have to maintain liberty by killing people. That's like literally the opposite of what you would think. The way, you know, we maintain liberty and freedom by cutting people's heads off.
Well, didn't Robespierre get executed himself?
Yeah.
He did, and so did Saint-Just, and so did Danton, and all those guys eventually kind of, you had the Girondists, which were like the more moderates that stepped in and said, you know, fuck these guys. Like, these guys they party way too hard.
I think Thomas Paine actually was in jail during the French Revolution, and he was supposed to be guillotined, but I think the executioner accidentally painted, like they would mark the door to, you know, say like, hey, take this guy out back tomorrow or whatever. And I think they marked the wrong side of the door, and he didn't die because of that.
You know who that also happened to? That happened to somebody else. That actually happened quite a bit. That also happened to the Marquis de Sade.
Oh, really?
Yep.
Yeah, he was set to be executed, and they fucked the door marking up, and so he got out of it. But his publisher ended up getting executed instead.
I hope I wasn't thinking of him when I said Thomas Paine then. No, I'm sure it happened to several people, though. But
it was common. It did happen.
It's just interesting to see how you have these two different groups of people throughout European history almost. I mean, it might be a bit of a stretch to, you know, paint it onto everything, but I think it's interesting how there's this almost ideological civil war that's been going on amongst Europeans for just about forever now, you know?
Yeah, and it's just reached its the psychotic sort of it's reached this point where we never thought, I don't think even in a million years, even the most liberal egalitarian of the 18th century, you know, a guy who might have worshipped Rousseau the way that and you know, the social contract, you know, the way that Robespierre, like, you know, adored him and everything. I don't think any of these guys still would have envisioned a world where, you know, whites would be on the verge of extinction and everything that they loved, because, you know, like it or not, I mean, I find the French Revolution itself disgusting. I would have been very much opposed to it time period. But at the same time, even we have to admit that these ideas of liberty and equality and such, as much as we might despise them, they still came from the minds of Europeans. So it's sort of, we never thought we would be destroying ourselves. I don't think they really thought that would happen.
Well, no, definitely not. I mean, they thought they were making a better world, like, which I think you can kind of see in that whole thing you mentioned earlier about liberty being refreshed by constant revolution. Like, they seem contradictory, but that's, you know, somehow what they thought. I don't know. It's just it's a very strange mindset to me.
The thing is, like, I live in the Boston area, and, you know, up here, I love the history of it. So the Anglo-Celtic sort of, it's very, most of the towns, the smaller towns and rural parts are still very ethnically homogeneous. And what I love about it, one of the things I'm going to say, like, I don't like about it, but one of the things I've noticed about it is people here are very, very, very into, like, if you're into history, you're into the American Revolution. There's almost nothing known about the loyalists who were fighting at that point because they were all driven into Canada. But if you look at like the French terror, which we were talking about, what would have been the liberals of their day, we don't really learn here in New England or even in the rest of the United States, and we never did, just about how terroristic guys like the Sons of Liberty were. They had patriots down in South Carolina, took this one loyalist guy. He was a young guy. He was originally from Scotland, I think. His name was Thomas Brown. And he earned the nickname Burnfoot Brown because a patriot group came to his house. They took him as a prisoner. They cracked his skull till he nearly died. He lived. They tied him to a tree and they roasted him with a fire on his feet after he'd been scalped and tarred and feathered. And I don't know if you know the details of what happens when you tar and feather somebody.
Yeah, it leaves you
scarred for life.
It's not like the common, idea of it. Like it was hot tar. It wasn't like an embarrassing thing. Like they poured hot tar on you. Like
it was painful. It burned you. It caused a lot of physical damage. It wasn't just like, being painted with something sticky. This was literally molten.
Yeah,
glitter.
Glitter on you.
Yeah.
Right. And what they did was they would also light your right, and they would light your feet on fire too if they didn't tar your body. In Thomas Brown's case, they also deformed his feet. And and this isn't me like trying to say like, oh, like fuck all the founding fathers. I mean, I'm not saying that. I mean, I'm simply saying that like, this war of these two opposing ideologies to sort of oversimplify it a little bit for conversation's sake, keep popping up. And the founding fathers they all argued with one another. But one thing is for certain is that the tarring and feathering and the terroristic activity, Thomas Hutchinson, for example, was the last royal governor of Boston. They burned his fucking house down and threatened his family and said, look, get the fuck out of town. Yeah. He didn't flee, so they burned his whole fucking house down. He didn't get the hell out of town. I mean, they almost killed him. What they would do also when they would tar and feather you is it didn't end at that. They would tar and feather you, and if they really felt like torturing you to death, they would put your body as it was burning from the tar on a wooden structure. It looked like a horse it was like a makeshift kind of shitty horse-shaped thing, and it was called riding the rail. And they would ride you through town, and the position that you were, it was like a stressed position, and it would break your back.
Is that where the phrase, when you say someone got rode on rail out of town, is that where that comes from?
Yes, it's exactly where it comes from, yeah. In fact, if you have ever seen the HBO series, John Adams?
I've never seen it, no.
Yeah, they show that scene in full detail. I mean, and they end up showing it's like brutal, dude. Like they show the guys stripped down completely naked, like private parts and all. And the guy approaches one of the most corrupt founding fathers. It has to be said was John Hancock. John Hancock was in real life a complete prick. He was a smuggler. He was a criminal. He was an upstart, and he was notorious for ripping people off. He was a corrupt business guy, essentially. He was a shyster. And this guy, comes up, says what he in the scene in the you can find it on YouTube. I'll put it in the little chat box for you. It's absolutely like gruesome to watch it because, and this actually happened. Hancock encourages the crowd, who are already being radicalized and politicized by guys like Sam Adams and the Sons of Liberty. What they would do is they would go into taverns where all the drunk dregs were, the lowest forms of society, and they would rev everybody up and tell them the king is, ripping you off and he's stealing your money and blase, blase. And these people would eat it up. And of course it wasn't the king, it was Parliament. And if you're going to blame anybody, you blame Lord North and the government, but you couldn't blame the king. The king had nothing to do with it. Had very little to do with it. And in this scene, he encourages the crowd to basically like snatch this guy, rip his clothes off, pour hot tar over his naked body, and then they dump the feathers on him. They kick the shit out of him for a little bit, and then they put him on the rail and they ride him out of town. And John Adams and Sam Adams were related. They were cousins. So John, with tears in his eyes, looks up at Sam and he says, "Do you approve of this?" And Sam is kind of like, "Well, people want liberty. This is how you get it. It doesn't come easy." And he says, "But do you approve of attaining political principles through terrorism?" Essentially is what he asks him. And he, Sam Adams had no answer for him. So.
We are so off topic.
Yeah, I apologize.
Oh, it's fine. No, I love this stuff. I think it's great. I think all our listeners will too. It's really interesting to talk about early American history. There's always so much that just doesn't get covered. You know?
Right. Yeah.
Yeah.
Man, this was a totally fun, informative, and really easy episode for me to do. I didn't have to say like anything. It was great.
Right.
I know it's Paranormies, so I hope I didn't I didn't sway too much from the folklore.
No, it's fine, dude. It's totally fine, dude.
This is probably like easily top 3 for me. I really enjoyed this.
Yeah.
During
the break,
about, like,
Scott was just fanboying all over how much he liked the episode. So yeah. This is good, dude. I'm glad to know, man. It's good to have you on, man.
Hey, thanks.
Dude, I love your music.
Thank you.
And obviously, I mean, I've contributed, I believe, to helping your music out.
Thank you. I appreciate that.
Right?
Appreciate that. Yeah.
How's that Epiphone holding?
Pretty much just. Yeah, it's doing really well. I still got to thank you for that. I still owe you for the shipping on that, man.
No, don't worry about. Dude, fuck off.
Up.
Don't worry about that. Look. That's yours. That's fine, man. It's like. How many acoustic guitars can one person play at once? You know what I'm saying? So anything I can do to help out.
Well, I ended up.
Anything I can do. To
go ahead.
That's all. Yeah. That's what I was gonna say. That was the end of the sentence. Anything I can do to help out. So.
Yeah, I ended up getting a banjo, my banjo, which is actually a banjitar. So it's a banjo tuned like a guitar, and they came out in the 20s. So I bought one of those, and I've been incorporating that with the guitar and stuff. So just kind of like switch it up a little bit. So, but I put the link to the John Adams tarring and feathering scene in the chat box if you want to watch that. At some point after the show. So it's pretty brutal. Yeah.
All right. Cool. Well, so yeah, what's our conclusion on the Salem Witch Trials? Don't trust teenage girls.
Do not trust 9 to 13-year-old girls that are acting weird. And yeah,
they're probably just being dumb kids. They're probably not possessed.
Well, I would, in closing, say this: the left tried to use the witch trials, even through art and elementary schools and such. We all have heard the big bullshit with the Salem Witch Trials, that it was supposed to be like, it was Arthur Miller's way of kind of protesting against the Red Scare and Joe McCarthy, and that's exactly what he was doing. But the irony, and this is how the left always project their own misgivings and their own fucked up nature, is that really the real history of the Salem Witch Trials and the Puritan political system at that time had far more in common with the left than it ever did with anything like Joe McCarthy or traditionalists or rights people.
That's the ironic thing about them using Puritan as an insult in the way that they do. Is it's like, no, your side was the Puritans.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly.
But since when has the left ever been honest about anything?
Ever.
Never. It's
the left.
You can't. It's based on dishonesty.
Ever.
Right. Yeah. Exactly.
All right, guys. This was fun.
Cool.
Patty, we're gonna have to have you come back on again one of these days.
Yeah, if you know anything else about anything else.
Anything else, dude? You just come on and sit and fucking shitpost with us about ghosts and stuff. I don't care.
Talk about guitar chords. I don't care.
Yeah.
Actually, I mean, I know a lot about ghost stuff from the Mid-Atlantic where I'm from. If you want me to come back, and maybe I'll try to stay more on topic with that time.
Okay. Or not. It doesn't matter. We don't care. Hey, it's free content. You're going to listen to it, okay?
We're not a serious show.
You shut up. We are too. We are a serious show.
Well, I'm a big fan.
Have you ever had any?
Have you ever had
any ghost stories yourself?
Yeah, I was actually going to bring that up. I think I came on, I guess it was like 6 months ago, and I only did like a 5-minute thing, but I had an experience happen to me, a couple, but the most notable was we were outside of Reading, Pennsylvania, in the countryside, and I was with some friends, and we were camping, and as we were getting, we were setting up our tent and everything, we got there really late, and this is near my friend's had property out there. In I guess, what is it, Berks County, PA, I think, outside of Reading. And it's very beautiful out there. It's all French and Indian war territory. during, the 1750s when war was raging through that part of the country very badly. And actually, where you put that painting of the Don Triani painting, that was depicted in that region. But so anyway, we're setting up camp, and it's about me and like 3 other guys, and you start seeing like these lights like all around the trees, and didn't think anything of it, like just whatever, like it could have been insects, could have been fireflies. They were really low to the ground, and as the sun went completely down, there was just this very, very eerie feeling. And I'm very skeptical. Like I don't like, I'm not an atheist. I'm a Christian. I'm an Orthodox Christian actually, but just actually converted to that church or something. I was a Catholic, was brought up as Catholic, not like a holy roller, but I believe in God and transcendence and the human soul. And I don't let stories like that usually get to me. So I just kind of was like, I'm probably just feeling a little anxious. I'd had some caffeine earlier, maybe it's that. But all my buddies were feeling the same exact way. We just had this feeling we didn't belong, just didn't belong. And we sat up all night, freaked out, because I can't describe it to you. It was just this very eerie feeling. We kept seeing these lights, and we kept seeing shadows, even though it was dark. And that was the weird part, is that it's pitch black. You look out of your tent, and somehow you're still seeing shadows go past the trees. This actually happened. I'm not making any of this up. And the next morning, it wasn't quite morning. I guess it would have been like it's the summertime, so it would have been like 5:45. You start to see the first little rays of sun, the sun coming up. And me and my friend Mark, my other friend didn't see it, but me and my other friend, we were up. We were all up, but me and one other friend, the other guys didn't see it, but me and this guy saw a figure from the distance that looked like a fucking Indian. He fucking looked like one. Just like was one run from like one tree to the next in a kind of like the way that somebody who was engaged in like guerrilla warfare would, like they were sort of going from trying to find cover, like they was crouched. So like he like went from like one tree to like 3 trees over, but it happened so quick. And I was like, did you just fucking see that? And he was like, yeah, I fucking saw that. And it's like barely any light is in there, but just like packed up all our shit. Fucking, I left like all my candy and all my fucking like snacks that I brought, just fucking left it and like hauled ass, and like we just got the fuck out of there. And we were supposed to stay there the whole weekend. We never went back. And my other buddy John that was with us was like, he's like, well, I didn't see anything, but I definitely felt like fucked up the whole night. Like something was weird. Like I can't describe it to you other than it was a feeling of impending doom. Like something was out there that was planning to get us, but didn't, and of course later on I'd read that area of Berks County was prime. Like at one point during the French and Indian War, there were several raids that happened there. So, but that's the only thing.
I do think that this is kind of my personal feeling on it. And I know, was it Zev? Is that his name that we're calling him that did this Skinwalker thing?
Yeah,
I don't
Mr.
remember
Skinwalker's
his pseudonym.
It was Zev.
Okay.
It was Zev. The Turk Roach?
Okay. Yeah.
Yes. Zev. Yeah.
Well, I know that I've talked to him about this before, and we both kind of have this feeling that the Indians almost kind of left something, I guess you could say, kind of like the Southwest. I know you get a lot of weird stuff happening in the Southwest on a lot of Indian places. Like almost they just kind of left something evil laying around, if that makes any sense.
Yeah, no, I have a buddy that's he's an alt-right guy. Like, he's only a recent convert. He was kind of I wouldn't call him a neocon, but he was just kind of like Beltway conservative for a while. But he finally came around to us, and he lives up in the Northwest, up in like Seattle. And actually, no, I think he lives in Canada now, but he used to live in Seattle for a while. I think he lives in Canada now. And he said the same thing to me years ago. Like, he's like, I feel like these woods up here are just like fucking cursed. Like the Indians just left something here. And I always thought he was like goofy, like, oh, whatever, man. Like until that happened to me, because that particular experience I just told you about wasn't that long ago. That was about 3 years ago. And it was some weird shit. I also used to work as a historical interpreter at Fort Delaware, which is out it's an island on Pea Patch Island, it's called. And it was a former Civil War prison. And I can't remember the exact number but it was a whole shitload of Confederates died there at the prison, and some Union guards, they get sick too because they're exposed to it. But a lot of Confederates died there on the island. I mean, they were just dying by every week. Guys just dropping like flies of all kinds of things. Cholera. There was a cholera outbreak. There was a smallpox outbreak. There was all kinds of stuff these guys were dying from. Exposure to the cold, heat stroke. And when you're there, I've been there on the island at like 2 a.m. We do ghost tours there actually. Well, I can't say we because I'm not there anymore,
Right.
but the fort actually conducts ghost tours, and that's where they rake in a lot of their money actually, after the summer season. And there is something on that island. I believe that it's just an eerie fucking place. I've never actually seen anything, but I've worked with people who did. Ghost Hunters actually did an episode there, the show. And then there was another British paranormal show that came out there while I was working there, and they interviewed all of us. I wasn't in the interview, but
well, if you think about ghosts being, I don't want to say created, but there's that whole theory of spirits a lot of times will come about when there's some sort of pain or really strong emotions. Like, we've been talking this whole episode about women getting raped and drug into the woods by basically what are orcs. Right. I mean, that's going to create something evil. If you believe that that's a thing, then surely that's going to be one of the kind of events that can cause it.
Right.
No, absolutely. And whether or not there's an ethereal spiritual aspect of it, I don't know, but there's definitely, even if it's just solely scientific, there's definitely something, an imprint, I think, that the human condition sort of leaves on its environment. I absolutely believe that.
Yeah, definitely.
I mean, like when you're with your significant other for many years, you sort of have this bond. If you walk in the room, she doesn't even need to say anything. If she's feeling pissed off, it as soon as you walk in the room. Right. It's just a feeling. There's like a vibe that people just give off, so.
Yeah, definitely.
Right. All right, guys.
Oh shit.
We're getting way.
I think this is gonna be a.
Yeah. I can't wait for the comment section of this one. Like, literally.
Oh yeah.
It's gonna be fun. Yeah. Well, for real, though,
I
Paddy,
really
thanks
spurred
for
out on this one.
No,
with my
dude, you didn't.
Stuff,
No,
so.
it's fine. It's fine, bro. It's fine. I enjoyed every minute of this. This was a great episode.
Thank you.
Yeah,
you can't
Scott,
really
thanks
have
for
a
hanging out.
discussion
Dude.
about the paranormal. You can't have a discussion about the paranormal without discussing history in a way. So
Right?
No,
that's
can't.
totally true. Yeah. A lot of this has to do with history, I mean, like, when we're talking about half naked, shaved head, painted up orcs.
Right.
Yeah. Right. All right, guys. So we're gonna get out of here. Again, this was a lot of fun, Paddy. We'll have you on again, man, dude.
Yeah, please, anytime. I'll come on. Just say the word, give me a heads up, and I'll come on, man.
Right on. And you know what? Maybe next time Brad won't come on, and we'll have more time to talk about it. No,
Yeah.
I love Brad. I do.
Internet.
I like Brad. It wasn't Brad's fault. His internet shit the bed tonight. So, anyways.
I'm actually glad I decided to. I have plans tomorrow, so we were supposed to meet up, and but I had to cancel on him. And initially, I was going to go over there. We were going to do the show together at his house, but since his internet connection fucked up, I'm glad
Yeah, no, you did the right thing, man.
So
You did the right thing. You went with your gut, and you were right. Always go with your gut.
Avoiding Bradshaw is always a great idea.
That's right. Ignore Bradshaw posts.
No, I love that guy. He's great. He's great.
I love Brad. Brad's a good boy. He does. Actually, speaking of Bradshaw is going to be taking us out of here with another creepypasta tonight. So,
nice.
Yeah. So, for therightstuff.biz, we have been the Paranormies presents the Ahnenerbe Hour. I'm Johnny Monoxide with Scott Taylor. We've had Mr. Paddy Tarleton on with us. We will see you guys, or talk to you guys next week. Later.
Time travel makes you gay.
I have to stop doing this. I know I have work in the morning. I know I have one strike. But I just get distracted. The basement is dimly lit by a single light bulb hanging from the center of the room. Well, that and my television screen. The beige walls contrast the white carpet to make it seem almost as if it's glowing. I have a whole house to myself, but always find myself retiring back here.
All that's changed in the past 10 hours has been the movies appearing on and off my screen, and the sound of my clock, which sounds every hour. That is what snaps me out of my trance. My eyes dart toward my clock and see it reads 3. I only have about 4 hours until work, but I really don't want to go upstairs. See, I have a childish, embarrassing fear. We've all been victims of this, but mine never left. My light switch is at the bottom of my stairs. This means I have to turn off my light and then sprint up the stairs like a kindergartner. Why? Because as stupid and immature as it may sound, I am certain that there are monsters lurking in each corner of my basement, waiting to snatch me and pull me into wherever they want to go when light is shed upon where they lurk. So as you can imagine, it is a living hell to go upstairs each night. Procrastinating doesn't help much either. I take a deep breath, tell myself to man up, and I get up. I walk to the television and turn it off with a loud click. I hate myself for this. It is so quiet. I can practically hear the beast breathing. I put my hand on the icy cold switch. The breathing of the things intensifies. I feel like a caged animal being watched, stalked. I look up the stairs, only a few seconds and it will all be over. 1, 2, 3. Pitch black. I have no sense of direction. They are touching me. I know they are. I feel the fragile, papery skin of one, the moist scales of another. The air grows damp with their breath and mine. They're grabbing, clawing at me, eager to pull me back into the abyss, nipping at my ankles and pulling at my legs. One part of me says it can't be real, but all the other parts of me tell me to get out of this horrific place. I feel the unbelievably slippery brass doorknob in my sweaty palms. I grip the rustic sphere and turn it with all my force. When I break into the cool air of my living room, the fresh air fills my lungs like the first step outside on a brisk autumn day. The dimly moonlit room is all the relief I could ever ask for. I look into the abyss for one last time and shut the door. My heart skips a beat when something squishy keeps the door from closing. As quickly as the living room gave me salvation, it is just as quickly turning into a nightmare. I look down, ready to confront whatever demon that has made its way out of my personal land of nightmares. But all I am confronted with is a sock. My left sock, wedged in between the doorframe. I look down, and sure enough, only my right foot is covered. I chuckle, wondering how I can be so childish, so silly. I toss the old sock into the darkness of my less horrifying basement. It's tossed back at me.